The cold came early that year. Clara Whitlock stood on the porch of her ranch house, watching the sky turn the color of old bruises. October wasn't supposed to feel like this, sharp enough to draw blood from your lungs, mean enough to kill anything foolish enough to be caught unprepared. But the frontier didn't care about calendars or what was supposed to happen. It took what it wanted and left you to count the cost. She was 26 years old and looked 40 in the wrong light. Her hands were scarred from rope burn and frostbite, her dark hair pulled back in a knot that had stopped being practical and started being permanent. The dress she wore was patched at the elbows, faded from black to something closer to charcoal. She'd worn it to Thomas's funeral 8 months ago, hadn't seen much point in changing since. The ranch stretched out before her in the fading light, 80 acres of stubborn Montana dirt that had broken better people than her. The barn leaned slightly to the east, its roof patched with mismatched boards. 3 of the fence posts were held up more by habit than structural integrity. She had 8 head of cattle left, down from 40 when Thomas was alive. 2 horses, one of them so old it wheezed when the wind changed direction. And chickens. Always the damn chickens, scratching and surviving when everything else seemed determined to die. Thomas had loved this place, had seen potential where Clara saw only work. He talked about the future like it was something you could grab hold of, something solid. 5 years they'd been married. 5 years of his optimism grinding against her skepticism until she'd almost started to believe him. Then a horse had thrown him during a storm. Broke his neck so clean the doctor said he probably didn't feel a thing. Claire had stopped believing in clean deaths after that. Mrs. Whitlock? She turned. Samuel Chen stood in the yard, hat in his hands, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Sam was her only remaining ranch hand, a quiet man in his 50s who'd worked for Thomas's father before the land had passed to them. He'd stayed on after the funeral more out of loyalty than because she could pay him properly. They both knew it. Cattle won't make it through winter, he said. No preamble. Sam had never been one for softening bad news. Not with what we got for feed. And the north fence is down again. Wolves got at the chickens last night, lost 4. Clara nodded. She'd heard the chickens screaming around midnight, but hadn't had the energy to go check. Guilt was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. How much would we need, she asked, for feed? Sam looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. More than we got. More than the bank's willing to lend, I'd wager. Already heard talk in town about the ranch, about how long you can hold on. What kind of talk? The usual. How it's too much for a woman alone. How you'd be better off selling while there's still something to sell. He met her eyes then, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression. Victor Hale's been asking questions. The name hit her like a fist to the sternum. Victor Hale owned half the territory and wanted the other half. He'd built his empire on other people's failures, buying up struggling ranches for pennies and consolidating power until he controlled the water rights, the best grazing land, the routes to market. Men like Hale didn't ask questions out of friendly concern. He can ask all he wants, Clara said, hearing the brittleness in her own voice. This land's not for sale. Sam nodded slowly, but they both knew what that meant. Saying no to men like Victor Hale wasn't the end of a conversation. It was the beginning of something else entirely. There's one more thing, Sam said. Got a stranger showed up about an hour ago. Man and a little girl. Said they're looking for work and a place to stay for the winter. I told them you probably weren't hiring, but he asked if he could speak to you direct. Clara felt the exhaustion settle deeper into her bones. Another mouth to feed was the last thing she needed. 2 more mouths if the child ate anything at all. Where are they? By the barn. Didn't want to presume to bring them to the house. She should send them away. Should tell them to try the Hendersons' place 10 miles south, or the mining camp up near the ridge. Should protect what little she had left because winter was coming and she was already rationing her own meals. But something in Sam's expression stopped her. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Sam shifted his weight. Man's got a look about him. Military maybe, or law. Moves careful, keeps the girl close, and he's got good gear, too good for someone just drifting. Whatever his story is, it's complicated. Complicated was the last thing Clara needed. But curiosity, that old fatal flaw, was already pulling at her. I'll talk to him, she said. A sec. The man stood beside a dappled gray horse that had seen better days but was still worth more than anything in Clara's stable. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of lean build that came from hard living rather than hard work. Dark hair touched with early gray, a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so carefully blank. He wore a heavy coat that had been mended multiple times, and there was a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle, well-maintained, expensive. The girl sat on a crate near the barn door, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with tangled brown hair and eyes that didn't blink enough. She wore a coat too big for her and held a cloth doll that had been loved nearly to pieces. When Clara approached, the child didn't look up. "Mrs. Whitlock." The man's voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Name's Elias Boon. This is my daughter Lila. Your man said you might have work." Clara looked him over, trying to reconcile the quality of his gear with the desperation of asking for winter work at a failing ranch. "Don't have much to offer," she said. Can barely pay the hand I got." "We're not asking for money." Elias said it flat, matter of fact. "Room and board. I can fix what's broken, handle the heavy work. Know my way around livestock and crops. Won't cause trouble." Everyone says they won't cause trouble. Then I find out they're running from something. Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "Can't run from what follows you, Mrs. Whitlock, but I can promise you won't be caught in the middle of it." It was the wrong answer if he was trying to reassure her, but it was an honest one, and Clara had developed a nose for dishonesty in the months since Thomas died. Everyone in town lied to her now about the ranch's prospects, about what they said behind her back, about whether they'd really stop by to help like they promised. "Why here?" she asked. "You've got good gear. Could get work somewhere easier." Elias looked at his daughter, and something in his expression cracked just enough for Clara to see the grief underneath. "Need somewhere quiet. Somewhere people won't ask questions. Somewhere my girl can have a winter without moving every week." Lila still hadn't looked up. Her fingers worked at the doll's dress, methodical and repetitive. Clara thought about the empty ranch house, about the silence that had become a third presence in every room, about the north fence that needed fixing and the cattle that needed tending and the 100 other tasks that Sam couldn't do alone, and she didn't have the strength for any more. She thought about Thomas saying yes to people when he should have said no, about how that generosity had gotten them into debt more than once, about how she'd promised herself she'd be smarter, harder, more practical. 2 weeks, she heard herself say. Trial. You pull your weight, we'll talk about winter arrangements. You don't, you move on. Fair? Elias nodded once. Fair. Barn's got a room at the back. Stove works if you don't mind feeding it. I'll bring blankets and something for dinner. Appreciate it. Clara turned to go, then stopped. Mr. Boon? Whatever you're running from, I mean it about not getting caught in the middle. This ranch has about all the trouble it can handle. Understood. She walked back to the house, feeling Sam's eyes on her from where he stood near the corral. He didn't say anything, but his expression was clear enough. Another risk in a season that couldn't afford any more. Clara didn't disagree, but she'd made her choice. Dinner was thin stew and bread 2 days past fresh. Clara brought it to the barn just after dark, finding Elias and Lila in the small room that used to house seasonal workers. He'd already cleaned the space, swept the floor, organized the few pieces of furniture, stacked firewood by the stove. The efficiency of it struck her. Most men would have settled in first, cleaned later. Lila sat on a narrow bed, the doll in her lap. She still didn't look at Clara. She doesn't talk much, Elias said, taking the pot of stew. Hasn't, for a while. Clara nodded. She understood silence. There's a pump outside for water. Privy's 20 yards east. Don't wander at night. We've got wolves, and they're hungry this year. We'll manage. She should have left then, should have retreated to the main house and the paperwork she'd been avoiding and the bed that still felt too big. But something kept her in the doorway. How'd she lose her mother? Clara asked. Elias's hand stilled on the pot. When he looked up, his eyes were flat and dark as river stones. Cholera. Last spring. Whole camp got sick. Lila survived. Her mother didn't. I'm sorry. So am I. The words hung between them. Two people who'd learned that sorry didn't change anything, didn't bring anyone back, didn't make the grief smaller. It was just something you said because silence felt worse. I lost my husband 8 months ago, Clara said. Didn't know why she was telling him this. Horse accident. 1 minute he was alive, next he was gone. Didn't get to say goodbye. Elias nodded slowly. That's the worst kind, when there's no time. Is there a good kind? No, but some leave you with less wreckage than others. Clara found herself almost smiling at that, a bitter, tired thing that barely qualified. Get some rest, Mr. Boon. Work starts early. Yes, ma'am. She left them there in the warm glow of the stove, father and daughter sitting in companionable silence, both of them carrying the weight of ghosts she couldn't see, but recognized all the same. What? Elias Boon proved himself before breakfast. Clara woke to the sound of hammering and found him already at the north fence, replacing posts that had rotted through. The work was clean, precise, the kind that came from someone who'd done it 1,000 times and knew the difference between making it look fixed and actually fixing it. Sam watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression thoughtful. He's been at it since dawn, Sam said when Clara approached. Didn't need to be told what was broken, just looked around and started working. That bother you? Makes me curious. Man doesn't work like that unless he's trying to prove something or forget something, maybe both. Clara didn't disagree, but she couldn't argue with results either. By midday, Elias had finished the fence, reorganized the tool shed, and was assessing the barn's roof. Lila sat nearby wherever he worked, always within sight, never speaking. She'd draw patterns in the dirt with a stick or arrange small stones in careful rows, but her eyes kept flicking to her father like she was afraid he'd disappear if she looked away too long. Mr. Boon, Clara called up to where he'd climbed onto the barn roof. It's past noon. You should eat something. He looked down, sweat darkening his collar despite the cold. I'll eat after I finish this section. You'll eat now, or you'll make yourself sick. Already lost one worker to stubbornness this year. That got him down. He climbed carefully, testing each foothold, and Clara realized he was being cautious not for himself, but because Lila was watching. If he fell, what would happen to her? They ate on the porch, cold chicken and hard cheese, water from the well. Lila took her food and retreated to sit against the house, picking at her meal with careful fingers. She always this quiet? Clara asked. Since her mother died. Elias kept his voice low. Doctor said it's shock, said she'd talk again when she was ready. I'm still waiting. Must be hard, being alone with it. No harder than what you're carrying. Clara looked at him sharply, but there was no judgment in his expression, just recognition. One survivor looking at another. Sam says you move like military, she said, or law. Used to be both. Marshal up in the Wyoming territory. Gave it up when Lila was born. Wife wanted a quieter life. What happened to quiet? Elias was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter. Cholera doesn't care about your plans. Neither does grief. We've been moving since Sarah died. Couldn't stay in the places that remembered her. Couldn't settle anywhere new because Lila wouldn't stop looking for her mother around every corner. So you came here. So we came here. Place that's fighting its own battles. Figured maybe we could help with yours while we figure out ours. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Clara in months. Everyone else offered sympathy or advice or thinly veiled suggestions that she sell before she lost everything. No one admitted that sometimes you were just trying to survive one day at a time, that sometimes the best you could hope for was to be useful to someone else, while you waited for your own wounds to scar over. The fence looks good, Clara said. If you can shore up the barn roof before the snow comes, that'd be worth keeping you through winter. Elias nodded. I can do that. And Mr. Boon? I don't care what you used to be. I care what you are now. You work hard. You don't cause trouble. We'll get along fine. Yes, ma'am. He went back to work after that, and Clara watched him for a moment before heading inside. She had accounts to reconcile, impossible numbers that wouldn't balance no matter how many times she added them. But for the first time in months, the ranch felt less empty. She didn't let herself think about what that meant. Mom. 3 days later, Victor Hale came to call. Clara was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard the horses. 4 of them, moving at an easy pace that said the riders weren't in any hurry. She set down the basket and stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Hale rode in front on a bay stallion worth more than Clara's entire property. He was 50, maybe 55, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no in any way that mattered. Behind him rode 3 men, hired muscle dressed up as ranch hands, hard-eyed and armed. Mrs. Whitlock. Hale touched the brim of his hat, all politeness and poison. Hope I'm not interrupting. Mr. Hale, what brings you out this way? He looked around the ranch with the expression of a man appraising livestock. Wanted to check on you. Heard you've been having a difficult time since Thomas passed. Thought I'd see if there was anything I could do to help. Clara kept her expression neutral. Men like Hale didn't help. They offered, and then they owned you. We're managing, she said. Are you? He gestured to the barn, the fence, the thin cattle in the distance. Winter's coming early this year, going to be a hard one. I'd hate to see you lose everything because of pride. I appreciate the concern. Do you? Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Clara, may I call you Clara? I'm going to be direct. This ranch is dying. You know it. I know it. Everyone in the territory knows it. You can keep fighting, keep pretending Thomas's dream is going to survive on willpower and determination, or you can be smart. Smart how? Sell to me. I'll give you a fair price, more than fair, considering the state of things. Enough to start over somewhere easier. Maybe back east where a woman alone doesn't have to work herself to death just to survive another season. There it was. The offer that was really a threat. The kind word that meant, sell now while you can, or I'll take it anyway and you'll get nothing. This land's not for sale, Clara said. Not to you, not to anyone. Hale's expression hardened just slightly. That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could settle this like civilized people. We are civilized? I said no. That should be the end of it. Should be? He looked past her, and Clara turned to see Elias standing near the barn, rifle held loose but ready. He didn't point it at anyone, didn't have to. The message was clear enough. Who's this? Hale asked, voice sharp. New hand, Clara said. Hired him for winter work. That's so. Hale studied Elias with the kind of attention a predator gives potential prey. Don't recall seeing you around the territory. Elias didn't respond, just stood there, patient and still, like he had all day. One of Hale's men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Elias noticed. Clara saw the almost imperceptible shift in his stance, the way his eyes tracked the movement. Whatever he'd been before, martial or something else, the instincts were still there. We should go, Hale said abruptly. He looked back at Clara, and the politeness was gone now, just cold calculation. Think about my offer, Mrs. Whitlock. Doors open, but it won't stay that way forever. This territory's got no room for failing ranches. He turned his horse and rode out, his men following. Clara watched them go, feeling the tension drain out of her shoulders. Elias walked over, still carrying the rifle. Friend of yours? Opposite of a friend. That's Victor Hale. Owns most of the territory, wants the rest. Including this place. Especially this place. Water rights run through my land. Without it, 3 of his properties dry up come summer. Elias nodded slowly, looking after the disappearing riders. Men like that don't give up easy. I know. And you're not planning to sell? No. Then things are going to get harder before they get better. Clara looked at him. You saying I should sell? Saying you should know what you're choosing. Fight's easier to start than finish. I didn't start this fight. Hale did. I'm just refusing to roll over. Something that might have been approval flickered across Elias's face. Fair enough. But when he comes back, and he will, it won't be for a polite conversation. You planning on leaving before that happens? Elias was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. No, ma'am. Made a deal. 2 weeks, then we'd talk about winter. I keep my promises. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite relief, but close to it. She wasn't stupid enough to think one man with a rifle would change the outcome of whatever Hale was planning, but it felt less lonely, knowing she wasn't facing it entirely alone. Better get back to that barn roof, she said. Snow's coming. Yes, ma'am. The first snow came 6 days later. It wasn't much, just a dusting that turned the ranch white for a few hours before melting in the afternoon sun. But it was a warning. Winter was close now, and with it all the challenges Clara had been trying not to think about. Elias had finished the barn roof and was working on reinforcing the cattle shelter. Lila had started helping with small tasks, collecting eggs, feeding the chickens, though she still didn't speak. Clara noticed the girl watching her sometimes, curious but cautious, like she was trying to figure out whether this place was temporary or something that might last. Clara understood that hesitation. She'd been in this ranch for 5 years and still sometimes felt like she was waiting for the real owner to show up and tell her to leave. Sam had warmed to Elias in the way of men who respect competent work. They moved around each other efficiently now, communicating more through gesture and nod than words. The ranch was starting to look less like something dying and more like something that might survive. Then Hale's men came back. It was just after dark, 3 riders coming fast. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the gunshots, not aimed at anything, just fired into the air. Warning shots, intimidation. She grabbed Thomas's old shotgun and stepped onto the porch. Elias was already there, rifle in hand, positioned where he had cover and a clear line of sight. Sam had taken position by the barn. The riders circled the yard, whooping and hollering like it was all a game. One of them threw a torch at the hay pile near the barn. It caught immediately, flames leaping up into the dark. "That's a warning," one of them shouted. "Next time we're not so careful where we aim." They rode off laughing, disappearing into the night as quickly as they'd come. Clara ran for the well while Elias and Sam fought the fire. It took 20 minutes to get it under control, by which point they'd lost most of the hay pile, and part of the barn's exterior wall was scorched black. "Damn it," Sam said, coughing smoke. "That was most of our winter feed." Clara stood staring at the damage, feeling fury build in her chest like a second fire. Hale had made his move, not direct enough to bring the law down on him, but clear enough to send a message: sell or watch everything burn. "We need to go to town," she said. "File a complaint with the marshal." Sam shook his head. "Marshal's in Hale's pocket. Everyone knows it. You go to him, he'll write it up as an accident. Boys drinking, got careless. Nothing to be done." "So we just accept it?" "I'm saying the law won't help you here. Hale owns it, same as he owns everything else." Clara turned to Elias. He was watching the burned hay with an expression she couldn't read. "You were a marshal," she said. "What would you do?" Elias looked at her, and she saw something dangerous in his eyes, something that had been carefully controlled until now. "What I'd do and what I'd advise are different things. You want my advice? Sell. Take what you can get and start over somewhere Hale's reach doesn't extend. And if I don't want advice? If I want to know how to fight this? Then you need to understand what kind of fight it is. Hale's playing by different rules. He's got money, power, and men willing to do whatever he pays them for. You've got a dying ranch, one old hand, and a widow's stubbornness. The math doesn't work in your favor. So I should just give up. I'm saying you should be realistic about what you're facing." Clara felt something crack inside her, all the grief and rage and exhaustion she'd been holding back for months. "I am being realistic. I'm realistic about the fact that this ranch is all I have left of my husband, that if I sell, I'm admitting everything we built together meant nothing, that I'm not strong enough to keep it alive. This isn't about strength. It's exactly about strength. You think I don't know how this looks? Woman alone, barely keeping her head above water, too proud to admit when she's beaten. I know what people say. I know they're waiting for me to fail." She gestured at the burned hay, the damaged barn. "And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm going to fail. But if I do, it's going to be because I tried everything, not because I gave up the first time someone set a fire." Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "Thomas was lucky to have you. Thomas is dead." "Yeah, he is, but his dream doesn't have to be." Clara looked at him, searching for mockery or pity, and finding neither, just understanding from someone who knew what it meant to keep fighting when every logical reason said to quit. "Will you help me?" she asked. "Not just with the work. With this. With Hale." Elias glanced toward the barn room where Lila was sleeping, protected from the night's violence by walls he'd helped repair. Clara saw the calculation in his eyes, the weight of keeping his daughter safe versus the pull of a fight he recognized. "2 conditions," he finally said. "First, we do this smart. No reckless moves, no unnecessary risks. We fight on our terms, not his. And second, if it looks like we're going to lose, you promise to get out before you lose everything, before someone gets killed." Clara wanted to argue, to say she'd never give up, never surrender. But she saw the seriousness in his expression and understood this wasn't just about her anymore. If she asked him to stand with her, she was asking him to risk Lila too. "Agreed," she said. They shook on it, hands clasped in the cold dark. 2 people who'd lost everything once, already deciding to risk it all again. Paca. The next morning, Clara rode into town. She hadn't been since the funeral, had avoided it because of the way people looked at her, with pity or judgment or that awful combination of both. But she needed information, needed to understand exactly what she was up against. The general store was run by Margaret Chen, Sam's sister-in-law. She was a practical woman in her 60s who'd buried 2 husbands and raised 4 children on the frontier. If anyone would tell Clara the truth, it was her. "Heard you had some trouble last night," Margaret said the moment Clara walked in. News traveled fast in small territories. "Hay pile caught fire. Lost most of our winter feed." "That all that caught fire? Or did Victor Hale's patience finally burn up too?" Clara almost smiled at that. "He made an offer last week. I declined. Guess he didn't take it well." Margaret nodded, measuring out flour with practiced hands. "Hale doesn't take no from anyone, especially not from women he thinks should know better." "You saying I don't know better?" "I'm saying Victor Hale has crushed bigger operations than yours without breaking a sweat. I'm saying you should be careful, Clara, real careful." "I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of everyone expecting me to fail." Margaret looked at her with something that might have been approval. "Your husband had that same stubborn streak. Got him killed, if you recall." "Thomas died in an accident." "Did he?" Margaret's expression was strange, significant somehow. "You ever wonder why that horse threw him? Thomas rode since he was 6 years old. He could handle any mount in the territory." Clara felt cold wash through her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Thomas refused to sell to Hale too. I'm saying he died 2 weeks after that refusal. I'm saying the horse that threw him was fine before and fine after. No sign of spoking at all." Margaret leaned closer. "I'm saying maybe you should ask yourself if Victor Hale is the kind of man who settles for hearing no twice from the same family." The floor seemed to tilt under Clara's feet. "You think Hale killed Thomas. I think your husband was in his way and then he wasn't. I think you should be very careful you don't end up the same." Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the counter. "If you knew, if you even suspected, why didn't you say something? Say it to who? The marshal who has dinner at Hale's house every Sunday? The territorial governor who owes his position to Hale's money?" Margaret's expression was pained. "I'm sorry, Clara, but there's knowing something and being able to prove it. There's suspicion and there's evidence. And in this territory, Hale controls both." Clara left the store with the flour she'd come for in a rage that made her hands ache. If Margaret was right, if Thomas hadn't died in an accident but been murdered, then this wasn't just about keeping the ranch anymore. It was about justice. She rode back in a storm of fury and grief, barely seeing the road. Elias met her in the yard, took one look at her face and didn't ask questions, just helped her unsaddle the horse and waited. "I need to know something," Clara finally said, "and I need the truth. When you were a marshal, did you ever kill someone?" Elias didn't flinch from the question. "Yes." "In the line of duty?" "Sometimes, not always." "Would you do it again, if you had to?" He studied her carefully. "Depends on the why. Depends on what's at stake." A pause. "What did you hear in town?" Clara told him about Margaret's suspicions, about Thomas and the horse, and the timing that felt too convenient. With every word, she saw Elias's expression harden. "Can't prove any of that," he said when she finished. "Suspicion isn't evidence." "I know, but it fits, doesn't it? Hale wants this land. Thomas said no. Thomas dies. Hale comes back to make me the same offer." "Yeah, it fits." Elias looked toward the barn, the burned hay pile, the evidence of Hale's escalating pressure. "Question is what you want to do about it." "I want to fight. Want to make him pay for what he did." "Revenge isn't justice." "Maybe they're the same thing out here." Elias shook his head. "They're not. And if you go down that road, you need to understand there's no coming back. You kill a man like Hale, even if he deserves it, and you become exactly what he says you are, a desperate widow who couldn't handle the frontier and turned violent." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Then what do I do? Just accept that he murdered my husband and got away with it? No. You get smart. You document everything. You build a case brick by brick. You find proof, find witnesses, find anything that turns suspicion into evidence." He paused. "And you survive long enough to see it through. Because dead martyrs don't get justice. They just get forgotten." It wasn't the answer Clara wanted. She wanted permission for her rage, validation for the violence building in her chest. But Elias was right. Surviving meant being smarter than her grief. "Okay," she said. "We do it your way. We build a case. We get proof. And we protect this ranch while we're doing it, because Hale's not going to stop with a burned hay pile." Clara nodded, wiping her eyes roughly. "Then we'd better get ready." Petit. They spent the next 3 days fortifying the ranch. Elias taught Sam and Clara how to set up watch rotations, how to spot approaching riders early, how to position themselves for defense if it came to that. He reinforced the barn doors, cleared sight lines around the house, made sure they had weapons stashed in strategic locations. Lila watched all of this with solemn eyes, and Clara wondered what the girl had seen before that made armed preparation seem normal. What kind of life had she and Elias lived before they came here? On the 4th day, they had visitors. 2 neighboring ranchers, Ben Morrison and his wife Kate, rode up mid-morning. Ben was a weathered man in his 60s who'd homesteaded 20 miles north. Kate was sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who'd outlasted 2 droughts and a prairie fire through sheer stubbornness. "Heard about your trouble," Ben said without preamble. "Heard Hale's putting pressure on you." "Word travels fast," Clara said carefully. "Not fast enough. We should have come sooner." Kate dismounted, looking at the burned hay pile with disgust. "He's done this before. To the Hendersons, the Calloway place, 3 others I could name. Pressure them till they sell or till they leave. We should have stood together against it." "We?" Clara asked. "Us. The small ranchers, the ones he's trying to squeeze out." Ben's expression was grim. "Alone, we're easy targets. Together, we're a problem he can't solve with a few hired guns and some strategic fires." Clara felt something unfold in her chest. Not quite hope, but close. "You want to stand against Hale? We want to stop pretending his business is his business and ours is ours. What he's doing affects all of us. Today it's your hay pile. Tomorrow it's my cattle. Next week it's someone else's well running dry mysteriously." Kate's jaw set. "We're tired of being picked off one by one." Elias stepped forward. "Standing together is a good idea, but you need to understand what you're risking. Hale plays rough. He's got resources you don't. You go against him, you'd better be ready for the consequences." "Who are you?" Ben asked. Not hostile, just curious. "Name's Elias Boon. I work for Mrs. Whitlock." "That all you are?" Elias met his eyes steadily. "That's all that matters right now." Ben nodded slowly, accepting the non-answer. "Well, Mr. Boon, we've been living with consequences for 20 years. Fear of Hale is just one more." He turned back to Clara. "We're having a meeting. Week from Saturday at our place. Anyone willing to stand together against Hale's land grab? You should come." "I'll be there," Clara said. After they left, she found Elias watching the horizon, that careful stillness he got when he was thinking hard about something. "You think it'll work?" she asked. "All of us standing together?" "Depends. If it's just talk and anger, no. Hale will wait it out, pick you off when you get complacent. But if you're actually organized, actually united, actually willing to defend each other's property and testify against his men," he paused. "Then maybe. Maybe it changes the math enough that he has to back down." "You don't sound convinced." "I've seen men like Hale before. They don't back down. They escalate." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Then we'd better be ready when he does." So, the week before the meeting, Hale struck again. This time, it was the well. Clara went out one morning to find the water clouded and bitter tasting. When Elias climbed down to check, he came up holding a dead coyote that had been stuffed down the shaft, deliberately placed to contaminate their water supply. "Son of a bitch," Sam said with quiet fury. "That's low even for Hale." They spent 2 days cleaning out the well, hauling water from the creek a mile away while they did. It was exhausting, frustrating work, and Clara knew that was the point. Hale was trying to wear them down, make every day a little harder until giving up seemed like the logical choice. But Clara had stopped being logical months ago. The night before the meeting, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the wind against the windows, thinking about Thomas, about the ranch, about the choice she'd made to fight instead of flee. A knock at her door made her sit up. "Mrs. Whitlock?" Elias's voice, quiet. "You awake?" She threw on a robe and opened the door. He stood there, fully dressed, rifle in hand. "Riders," he said. 4 of them, moving slow about a mile out. Could be nothing. Could be Hale's men. Clara grabbed her shotgun. "Where's Lila?" "With Sam in the barn. Safest place if shooting starts." They took positions on the porch, watching the dark prairie. Sure enough, 4 shapes materialized from the night, moving at a walk. As they got closer, Clara recognized the lead rider, Ben Morrison. She lowered her gun and stepped down to meet them. "Ben, what's wrong?" The older rancher's face was grim in the lamplight. "They hit us tonight. Hale's men. Burned our south pasture. Ran off half our cattle. Would have been worse, but we saw them coming and drove them off with gunfire." "Anyone hurt?" "One of my hands took a bullet in the arm. He'll live. But this," Ben gestured at the riders behind him, "this is what we're up against. He's not even pretending it's random trouble anymore. He's declaring war on anyone who stands with you." Clara felt the weight of that. People getting hurt because she wouldn't sell. Ranches burning because she'd chosen to fight. "Maybe you shouldn't come to the meeting," she said quietly. "Maybe I should handle this alone." "The hell you should." Kate Morrison rode forward, her face hard as granite in the lamplight. "You think we're backing down now? After everything?" "That's exactly what Hale wants, to make you feel responsible for his violence, to make you so guilty you give up." "But people are getting hurt. People were already getting hurt. The Hendersons lost their land last year, the Callaways the year before. Hale's been doing this for a decade, just slow enough that nobody noticed until it was too late." Kate's voice was fierce. "You didn't start this, Clara. You're just the first one brave enough to fight back loud enough for the rest of us to hear." Elias spoke up from behind Clara. "Mrs. Morrison's right. This fight was always coming. Hale's just accelerating his timeline because you forced his hand." Clara looked at the assembled ranchers, tired, angry people who'd chosen to ride out in the middle of the night rather than let her stand alone. She thought about Thomas, about Margaret's suspicions, about justice deferred so long it had started to look like acceptance. "Saturday's meeting," she said. "We're not just talking anymore. We're making a plan. A real one. And anyone not willing to see it through should stay home, because this is going to get worse before it gets better." Ben nodded grimly. "We know. We're ready." After they left, Clara and Elias stayed on the porch, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. "You meant what you said," Elias observed, "about it getting worse." "Yeah, I did." Clara looked at him. "You having second thoughts? About staying?" "Every day." He said it simply, honestly. "Every day I think about taking Lila and leaving before this explodes. But every day I stay anyway." "Why?" Elias was quiet for a long time. "Because running didn't help before. Because Lila needs to see that sometimes you stand and fight even when it's hard. Because—" he trailed off, then started again. "Because I'm tired of the Victor Hales of the world winning just because nobody's willing to stand against them." Clara understood that. Understood being tired of retreat, tired of accepting injustice because fighting back was inconvenient or dangerous or doomed. "Saturday," she said. "We make our stand, all of us together." "Saturday," Elias agreed. They went back inside as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. 2 people who'd come together by accident and chosen to stay by design, preparing for a fight that would define whether anything they cared about survived. The frontier was unforgiving, but sometimes, if you were stubborn enough and brave enough and desperate enough, you could force it to bend. Clara Whitlock was done bending. It was time to see if she could break. Saturday morning broke cold and clear, the kind of day that made the Montana sky look like polished steel. Clara stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bedroom, trying to make herself look less like someone who'd slept 3 hours in the past 2 nights. The dark circles under her eyes weren't cooperating. She could hear movement downstairs. Elias and Sam preparing the horses, Lila's quiet footsteps as she helped set out breakfast. The ranch had developed a rhythm over the past 2 weeks, a pattern of shared work and watchful silences that felt almost normal if you didn't think too hard about the armed sentries and the burned hay pile still visible from the kitchen window. "You look like hell," Sam said when she came down. He was drinking coffee so strong it could strip paint, his rifle leaning against the table within easy reach. "Thanks for the honesty. Someone's got to give it to you. Everyone else is too polite or too scared." He studied her over the rim of his cup. You ready for this meeting? For what comes after? Clara poured herself coffee, hands steadier than she felt. No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's either brave or stupid. Haven't decided which. Can it be both? Sam almost smiled at that. Yeah, I suppose it can. Elias came in from outside, bringing cold air and the smell of horses with him. Lila followed close behind, wrapped in a coat Clara had altered to fit her small frame. The girl still didn't talk, but she'd started making eye contact now, started responding to simple requests with nods or shakes of her head. Progress measured in increments so small they barely registered, but progress nonetheless. Horses are ready, Elias said. Should get moving if we want to make Morrison's place by noon. Clara nodded, draining her coffee. She'd debated leaving Lila behind with Sam, but Elias had been firm. They stayed together, always. Whatever his past held, it had taught him that separation meant danger. They rode out under a sky that promised snow, but hadn't delivered yet. The Morrison Ranch was 20 miles north, a hard 2-hour ride over terrain that got rougher the farther from town you went. Clara had made the journey twice before, both times for social calls when Thomas was alive, and the world felt less fragile. Now she was riding to plan a war. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it settled into her bones like certainty. She'd spent 8 months being scared, of failure, of judgment, of the future stretching out empty and impossible. Fear was exhausting. Anger, at least, gave you something to do. They weren't alone on the road. As they rode north, Clara spotted other riders converging from different directions. The Hendersons on their matched sorrels. The Calloway brothers, grim-faced men who'd lost their father's ranch to Hale's maneuvering 3 years back and had been scraping by as hired hands ever since. More people she recognized from town, from church gatherings back when she'd still attended, from the scattered community of ranchers and homesteaders trying to carve lives from unforgiving land. All of them headed the same direction, all of them looking like people who'd reached the end of compromise. Ben Morrison's ranch house was bigger than Clara's, built by his father, and expanded over 3 decades of stubborn survival. The main room had been cleared of furniture, chairs borrowed from neighbors lined up in rough rows facing a makeshift podium, an overturned crate with a lantern on it. Kate Morrison met them at the door, her expression tight with tension and something that looked like relief. "Wasn't sure you'd come," she said to Clara. "After what happened to us? Thought you might decide it was too dangerous. That's exactly why I came. If we don't stand together now, we never will." Kate squeezed her shoulder, a brief gesture that carried weight. "Find a seat. We're waiting on a few more, then Ben will start." The room filled slowly. Clara counted 23 people, not including children. Most were ranchers, but there were also townspeople, the blacksmith, a shopkeeper, 2 women who ran the boarding house, even old Doc Brennan, who'd delivered half the babies in the territory and buried the other half when frontier life claimed them too soon. Not everyone was there. Clara noticed the absences, families too scared or too practical to risk Hale's wrath, people who'd chosen safety over solidarity. She didn't blame them. Hell, part of her wanted to join them, wanted to ride home and lock the doors and pretend she could wait this out. But Thomas's face kept appearing in her mind. Thomas saying they could build something here, something that mattered. Thomas dead in a riding accident that maybe wasn't an accident at all. She stayed in her seat. Ben Morrison stood and the room quieted. He wasn't a natural speaker, his hands fidgeted with the brim of his hat, and his voice came out rougher than usual. But what he lacked in polish, he made up for in raw honesty. "Most of you know why we're here. Victor Hale has been squeezing small ranchers out of the territory for years, buying up land, consolidating power, eliminating anyone who stands in his way." He paused, looking around the room. "And we let him do it. We told ourselves it was business. We told ourselves it wasn't our problem if the Hendersons had to sell, if the Calloways lost their father's ranch, if prices kept dropping and water rights kept disappearing into Hale's hands." Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. The accusations hit close because they were true. "But it is our problem," Ben continued, "because Hale doesn't stop. He just keeps taking until there's nothing left to take. And now he's going after Clara Whitlock's place. And we're here because some of us are tired of watching people lose everything while we do nothing." He gestured to Clara. "Stand up, would you?" She did, feeling the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. Clara's husband died 8 months ago. Suspicious circumstances, though nothing proven. Hale made her an offer on her land. The same offer he's made to everyone in this room at some point. She said no. And since then, her hay pile's been burned, her well contaminated, her livestock threatened. Last night, my ranch was hit too because Hale knows I'm supporting her. The room erupted in murmurs. Ben raised his hand for quiet. Here's what I'm proposing. We form an alliance. Not just talk, real cooperation. We watch each other's properties. We testify if we see Hale's men causing trouble. We pool resources to rebuild what gets destroyed. And we make it clear to Hale and everyone else that going after one of us means going after all of us. That's easy to say, called out Jacob Henderson, a rail-thin man whose mustache drooped like his spirit. But Hale's got money, men, and the marshal in his pocket. What do we have? Some burned-out ranchers and good intentions? We've got numbers, Kate Morrison said sharply. We've got witnesses. And we've got the law on our side, even if the local marshal won't enforce it. The law? Jacob laughed bitterly. The law doesn't care about us. Elias stood up. The movement was quiet, but something about it commanded attention. The room went silent. The law cares when you make it care, he said. His voice carried that rough authority Clara had noticed the first day they met. I worked as a territorial marshal for 6 years. I know how the system works. Hale gets away with what he does because nobody documents it, nobody testifies, nobody builds a case strong enough to bring to higher authorities. And who are these higher authorities? Someone asked skeptically. Territorial governor, federal marshals, circuit judges who answer to Washington, not to local strongmen. Elias looked around the room. Hale owns the local marshal, yeah, but he doesn't own the whole system. You get enough evidence, enough witnesses willing to sign affidavits, you can go over the marshal's head. Make enough noise, and someone has to listen. You make it sound simple, Jacob said. It's not simple. It's hard and dangerous and might not work. But it's possible, which is more than you've got right now. An older woman Clara didn't recognize spoke up from the side. Say we do this. Say we band together, document everything, build this case. What's to stop Hale from just killing us all? He's done it before, or near enough. People who got in his way have a habit of dying in convenient accidents. The room went very quiet. Clara felt ice in her stomach because the woman was saying what everyone was thinking. Elias didn't flinch. You're right. This escalates things. Hale will feel threatened, and threatened powerful men do desperate things. Some of you might get hurt. Some of you might die. That's the reality, and anyone who tells you different is lying. So why should we risk it? The woman pressed. Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is watching Hale take everything piece by piece until there's nothing left. The alternative is your children growing up in a territory where power means everything and justice means nothing. He paused. I'm not going to stand here and promise you this works out fine, but I will promise that if you do nothing, things only get worse. Clara found herself standing again. Thomas used to say that the frontier breaks everyone eventually. The question is whether you break trying to build something or break doing nothing while others destroy what's left. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. I'm fighting because I'm tired of accepting that good people lose and bad people win. I'm fighting because someone has to, and it might as well be me, but I can't do it alone. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. I'm not asking anyone to risk more than they can afford. I'm not asking for heroes. I'm just asking for witnesses, for people willing to see what's happening and say it out loud, for neighbors willing to help rebuild when Hale's men tear things down, for solidarity instead of silence. The silence stretched long enough that Clara started to think she'd misjudged the room entirely. Then Doc Brennan stood, joints creaking. I'll testify, he said. Treated 3 accidents in the past year that didn't add up. Broken bones from falls that looked more like beatings. Burns from fires that started too conveniently. I'll put it in writing, sign my name to it. The blacksmith stood next. I'll document property damage. Every piece of equipment I fixed that was sabotaged. Every tool that was destroyed deliberately. I've been keeping quiet because I didn't want trouble. Done being quiet. One by one, others rose. Not everyone. Clara counted 7 people who stayed seated, faces closed off and worried. But 16 people stood, and that was enough to make her throat tight with something that wasn't quite hope, but felt close to it. Ben Morrison looked around the room with grim satisfaction. Then we're decided. We form a defensive alliance. We watch each other's backs. We document everything. and we start building a case that even the territorial governor can't ignore. We'll need organization, Kate said. Patrol schedules, communication systems, ways to respond quick if someone's property gets hit. And we need to be smart about evidence gathering, Elias added. Photographs if possible, sworn statements, documented timelines, everything dated and witnessed by multiple people. The meeting shifted into practical planning. They divided the territory into zones, established signal systems, smoke during the day, lantern flashes at night, for calling for help, created a rotation of sentries who would watch the most vulnerable properties, discussed ways to document incidents without putting themselves in more danger. Clara listened, contributing when she could, but mostly just feeling the weight of what they were building. It was fragile and probably insufficient and likely to fall apart the first time hail hit them hard enough. But it was something, a structure where there had been only isolation before, a promise where there had been only fear. After 2 hours, people started drifting out in groups, no one wanting to be caught alone on the road. Elias approached Ben and Kate as others filed past. "You should know," he said quietly. "This puts targets on your backs. Hale's going to know about this meeting within days if he doesn't know already. He'll come after the organizers hardest." Ben nodded. "We know. Why do you think we cleared the good furniture out? Man wants to burn down my house. Least I can do is not make it easy on him." "You're taking this seriously. Deadly seriously. Lost a cousin to Hale's business practices 4 years back. Man fell into a gorge after refusing to sell water rights. Convenient fall. Convenient timing." Ben's jaw was set hard. "Should have stood against him then. Doing it now, whatever it costs." Clara felt Lila's small hand slip into hers. The girl had been sitting quietly in the corner during the whole meeting, drawing patterns in the dust with her finger. Now she looked up at Clara with those two serious eyes, and Clara wondered what she understood of all this, what scars she carried from whatever violence she'd witnessed before coming to the ranch. "We should get back," Elias said. "Don't want to be on the road after dark." They said their goodbyes and headed outside where the sky had turned the color of old pewter. The promised snow was closer now. Clara could smell it in the air. That particular sharpness that came before a storm. The ride back was quiet, each of them lost in thought. Clara kept replaying the meeting in her head, counting the people who'd stood, remembering the faces of those who hadn't, wondering if 16 people was enough to make a difference, or just enough to make them all better targets. They were halfway home when Elias suddenly reined in his horse, one hand going up in a signal for silence. Clara stopped, heart jumping into her throat. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders. 4 of them, quarter-mile west, moving parallel to us." Clara strained to see, but couldn't make out anything in the fading light. "Could be ranchers heading home from the meeting. Moving wrong for that. They're tracking us." Sam cursed quietly, checking his rifle. "Hale's men? Probably." Elias looked around, assessing. "Open ground for the next 2 miles, not ideal if they decide to engage." "What do we do?" "Keep riding, stay alert. They might just be observing, reporting back. Starting a fight on open road with a child present is risky, even for Hale." They continued, but the easy rhythm of the morning ride was gone. Clara kept glancing west, catching glimpses of distant riders keeping pace. Her hands ached from gripping the reins too tight. Lila must have sensed the tension because she pressed closer to Elias, one small hand fisted in his coat. He rode with one arm securing her, the other free to reach his rifle if needed. The riders followed them for 40 minutes before finally veering off as they approached Clara's property line. Elias watched until they disappeared completely before relaxing slightly. "They were making sure we knew we were being watched," he said. "Intimidation tactic." "Did it work?" Clara asked. "Yeah, but we expected it, part of the game." Clara hated thinking of this as a game. Games had winners and losers, rules and referees. This felt more like 2 animals circling each other, waiting to see who'd strike first. They put the horses away in tense silence, everyone looking over their shoulders, expecting trouble that didn't come. Sam took first watch while Clara made dinner, thin stew again, supplemented with bread she'd traded for in town. Resources were getting tighter, and the lost hay pile meant they'd have to slaughter cattle earlier than planned or watch them starve through winter. The math of survival kept getting worse. After dinner, Elias helped Lila get ready for bed while Clara cleaned up. Through the window, she could see Sam making his rounds, rifle over his shoulder, breath steaming in the cold air. How long could they maintain this level of vigilance? How long before exhaustion made them sloppy? A knock at the door made her spin, heart racing. But it was just Elias, Lila presumably asleep in the barn room. "Got a minute?" he asked. They sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred wood where Clara had sat with Thomas planning their future, where she'd sat alone after his funeral trying to figure out how to have a future at all. "Today was good," Elias said. "More people willing to stand than I expected." But Hale's going to respond, probably within the week. He can't let this alliance form without trying to break it. Clara nodded. She'd been thinking the same thing. What do you think he'll do? Depends how threatened he feels. Could be more property damage, hit multiple places at once, show that numbers don't matter. Could be direct violence, hurt someone badly enough to scare the others back into submission. Elias paused. Or he could go legal, trump up charges, use the local marshal to arrest people on false pretenses. Hard to maintain an alliance when your leaders are in jail. Can he do that? He's done it before, according to Ben. Man named Carter refused to sell 2 years back. Got arrested for cattle theft, Hale's cattle, naturally. Case got thrown out eventually, but by then Carter had lost everything paying for defense. Sold the ranch for pennies just to get out from under the legal fees. Clara felt sick. She'd been thinking of this as a physical fight, protecting property, defending against attacks. But Hale had money for lawyers, influence with judges, the patience to destroy people through legal warfare as easily as through burning barns. "We're outmatched," she said quietly. "Yeah, we are." "So why are you still here?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, fingers tracing patterns on the table. "You know what I've been running from? Why Lila and I couldn't stay anywhere?" Clara shook her head. Her mother's death wasn't just cholera. It was cholera in a camp that shouldn't have existed. Workers imported from California to work Hale's mines. Yeah, your Victor Hale. He's got operations all over the territory. Promised them good wages, decent conditions. Reality was squalor, starvation pay, and when disease broke out, he quarantined the camp and let them die rather than risk it spreading to his profitable operations. Clara's breath caught. "Sarah was in that camp?" "We both were. I'd taken a job as camp security, didn't know what I was walking into until it was too late. By the time the quarantine hit, Lila was born and Sarah was sick. I got Lila out before she caught it, but Sarah..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "Sarah died screaming for help that never came because Hale decided a few dozen immigrant workers weren't worth the cost of medical intervention." "That's murder." "Yeah, it is. But proving it? Different story. Camp got burned to the ground after everyone was dead or scattered, records destroyed, witnesses too scared to testify. I tried going through official channels, wrote letters to the territorial governor, tried getting federal marshals involved. Nothing. Hale's money insulated him from consequences." Clara understood now. Understood why he'd ended up here, why he'd stayed despite the danger. "So this isn't just about my ranch. This is about finally having enough people willing to stand against him that maybe, we can actually make charges stick. About building the case I couldn't build alone." Elias met her eyes. "I should have told you earlier, before you decided to trust me, before you let me involve your fight with mine. Would it have changed anything? Might have made you think twice about alliance with someone who's already on Hale's list." Clara considered that. Considered the danger of harboring someone Hale had reason to hate, the added risk to her property and her life. Then she thought about Thomas, about Margaret's suspicions, about justice deferred becoming justice denied. "No," she said, "wouldn't have changed anything. If anything, it makes me trust you more. You know what we're up against. You're not walking in blind." Something that might have been relief crossed Elias's face. "We're going to need that case to be airtight. Documentation, witnesses willing to sign affidavits, evidence that can't be destroyed or discredited." "You have a plan?" "The beginning of one. But it requires getting access to Hale's records, financial documents showing where his money really comes from, how he's been manipulating land sales, proof of the bribes and intimidation. That's impossible. Those records would be locked up tight." "Maybe not. Hale's operation is big, which means employees, clerks, bookkeepers, ranch managers, people who might have access and might be convinced to help if the price is right." "You mean bribe them?" "I mean appeal to their conscience or their self-interest, whichever works. Someone in that organization knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. We just need to find them. Clara thought about it. It was risky, possibly foolish, definitely dangerous. But what choice did they have? Meeting publicly and forming alliances was fine for mutual protection, but it wouldn't bring Hale down. For that, they needed ammunition. How do we find this hypothetical person with a conscience? Carefully. Start with people on the edges of his operation, workers he's cheated, clerks he's threatened, someone who's got reasons to want him to fail. A thought struck Clara. The boarding house ladies, they were at the meeting today. They'd see everyone who comes through town, hear all the gossip. If there's someone connected to Hale who's disgruntled, they'd know. Elias nodded slowly. That's good. That's a start. They talked through details for another hour. How to approach potential sources. What kind of evidence they needed. Ways to protect people willing to help them. It felt absurd. Two people with no legal authority planning to take down the most powerful man in the territory. But absurd didn't mean impossible. When Elias finally left to check on Lila and relieve Sam for the next watch shift, Clara sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the wind pick up outside. The storm was coming, the one the sky had been promising all day. She could feel it in her bones, the pressure change, the electricity in the air. She thought about Thomas, wondered what he'd think of all this. He'd been the optimistic one, the believer in systems and fairness and eventual justice. She'd been the skeptic, the one who saw how the world really worked. Now here she was, fighting for his dream while using methods he probably would have hated, building alliances and gathering evidence and preparing for a fight that might destroy everything they'd built together. But Thomas wasn't here anymore, and Clara had learned that sometimes you had to break the rules to get justice, had to fight dirty because the other side never fought clean. She locked the doors, checked the windows, made sure the shotgun was loaded and within reach. Then she went upstairs to bed, knowing she wouldn't sleep well but needing to try anyway. The storm broke around midnight, snow coming down in thick sheets, wind howling around the house. Clara lay awake listening to it, thinking about the meeting, about Hale's riders tracking them home, about Elias's revelation and the impossible task they'd set themselves. Somewhere out there in the storm, Victor Hale was probably sleeping peacefully in his warm house, confident in his power and his money and his ability to crush anyone who opposed him. Clara smiled grimly into the darkness. Let him be confident. Confident men made mistakes. And she was learning to be patient, to wait for the opening, to gather her strength for the moment when it would matter most. The frontier broke everyone eventually, but Clara Whitlock was discovering she could break hard things too, if she hit them right. Morning came gray and cold, 6 inches of fresh snow covering everything. Sam looked exhausted from his watch shift, and Clara insisted he sleep while she and Elias handled the morning chores. Lila came with them, bundled in layers that made her look like a small moving pile of blankets. The cattle were restless, spooked by the storm. 2 of the fence posts they'd repaired had come down in the wind, and it took Clara and Elias an hour to secure them again. Working side by side in the bitter cold, she was struck by how natural it had become. This partnership, this shared labor. They moved around each other efficiently, anticipating needs without speaking. It was so different from working with Thomas, who'd been enthusiastic but clumsy, full of ideas but short on execution. Elias was all execution, quiet competence that got things done without fanfare. She caught herself wondering what it would be like if this was permanent. If the alliance worked, and Hale was defeated and they survived long enough to build something lasting. Would Elias stay? Would Lila learn to talk again? To trust that home meant safety instead of temporary shelter? Would Clara herself learn to want a future instead of just surviving the present? Got company, Elias said, interrupting her thoughts. Clara turned to see a horse and rider approaching from the south. As they got closer, she recognized Doc Brennan, bundled against the cold medical bag secured to his saddle. "Doc?" she called as he dismounted stiffly. "Something wrong?" "Plenty wrong, but nothing new." He looked older than he had at the meeting, fatigue etched deep in the lines of his face. "Came to warn you. Hale knows about the meeting, already making moves." Clara's stomach dropped. "What kind of moves?" "Legal ones. Got the marshal to start investigating irregularities in property claims. Starting with yours, says there's questions about whether Thomas's title transfer was legitimate, whether you've got legal standing to hold the ranch. That's nonsense. Everything was filed properly." Course it was, but Hale's got a tame judge willing to issue temporary injunctions while it gets sorted out. Could freeze your ability to sell cattle, take loans, make any legal transactions, essentially lock you out of operating the ranch while his lawyers tie you up in court. Elias swore quietly. And by the time it gets resolved, she's bankrupt and has to sell anyway.
That's the idea. He's doing it to 3 other ranchers from the meeting too. Henderson, Morrison, the Callaways, hitting the most vulnerable first, showing the rest what happens when you organize against him. Clara felt fury building, hot and acidic. Can he actually do this? He's doing it. Whether it'll hold up is another question, but the process is the punishment. Legal fees alone will ruin most of you. So we're finished before we even started. Didn't say that. Doc reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. Brought you something. Records from the Territorial Land Office, going back 20 years. Shows every property Hale's acquired, every title transfer, every claim dispute. I've been collecting this for years, waiting for the right time to use it. Clara took the envelope with shaking hands. Why? Because Hale killed my son. Doc's voice was flat, emotionless, in the way of grief too old to cry about. 8 years ago, my boy worked as a surveyor, found discrepancies in some of Hale's property claims, land he'd acquired through what looked like fraudulent surveys and intimidated sellers. He was going to report it. 3 days later, his body was found at the bottom of a ravine. Sheriff ruled it an accident. But you don't think it was. I know it wasn't. My son had been a surveyor for 15 years. He didn't fall off cliffs. But knowing something and proving it are different things, especially when the man you're accusing owns the local law. He tapped the envelope. Everything in there is legal, properly documented, and admissible in any legitimate court. It shows a pattern. Hale's entire empire built on fraud, intimidation, and manipulation of the land claim system. Alone, it's not enough. But combined with everything else you're gathering, testimony from victims, documentation of recent crimes, it starts to build a picture that even corrupt officials can't ignore. Clara opened the envelope, scanning the pages inside. Surveys, title transfers, affidavits from sellers claiming they were coerced. It was damning if they could get anyone to look at it seriously. Why give this to me? She asked. Why not use it yourself? Because I'm old and tired and spent 8 years being too scared to act. Because my son's dead and I can't bring him back, but maybe I can stop Hale from killing anyone else's children. Doc's eyes were wet. And because you're young enough and angry enough to see this through. I'm not. But I can help. Elias had been reading over Clara's shoulder. This is good, really good, but it needs context. Recent incidents, witness testimony, a narrative that connects historical fraud to current violence. Working on it, Doc said. Got statements from 4 people willing to testify about intimidation tactics. Not signed yet. They're scared, but willing to talk in principle. And I'm documenting every suspicious injury, every convenient accident, every death that doesn't quite add up. We need financial records too, Clara said. Something showing where his money goes, who he's bribing, how the corruption operates at every level. That's harder. Hale keeps those locked down tight. You'd need someone inside his organization willing to turn. They stood in the snow, 3 people holding an envelope that might be the beginning of justice or just another futile gesture, and Clara felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the danger, the slim chance of actually succeeding. If we do this, she said slowly, if we really build this case and push it through, people are going to get hurt. Hale's not going to just let us expose him. People are already getting hurt, Doc said. Difference is, now we're fighting back. After he left, Clara and Elias brought the envelope inside, spreading the documents across the kitchen table. Page after page of systematic fraud, carefully documented over 2 decades. It was overwhelming and infuriating and exactly what they needed. We need to make copies, Elias said. Multiple copies stored in different locations. If Hale finds out about this, he'll try to destroy it. Clara nodded. I'll take them to town tomorrow. Get the clerk to make certified copies, store 1 set at the boarding house, another with the Morrisons. I'll come with you. Not safe to travel alone anymore. She didn't argue. The rules had changed. Safety meant numbers now, meant armed escorts and constant vigilance. It meant living like people at war. That night, Clara couldn't sleep again. She kept thinking about Doc Brennan's son, about Thomas, about all the people Hale had destroyed in building his empire,
about the widows and orphans and broken families left in his wake. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Found Elias already there, sitting in the dark, rifle across his lap. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, thinking about Sarah, about the camp, about all the ways I failed to protect her. Clara sat down across from him. "You got Lila out. That counts for something." "Does it? I saved one person while dozens died. I walked away instead of fighting, told myself I'd get justice later through proper channels. And where did that get me? Nowhere. Sarah's still dead and Hale's still powerful, and nothing changed. Until now. Maybe. Or maybe we're just deluding ourselves, thinking a bunch of struggling ranchers can take down an empire." Clara understood that doubt, felt it herself most days, but she'd learned something in the months since Thomas died. Sometimes you had to act anyway, even when success looked impossible. You know what Thomas used to say? "The work matters more than the outcome." Drove me crazy because I always wanted guarantees, wanted to know the effort would pay off. But he was right. Fighting matters, even if we lose. Trying matters, even if we fail. Elias looked at her in the darkness. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" They sat in silence for a while, two people keeping vigil against threats both external and internal, Hale's men and their own despair. Finally, Elias spoke again. "Lila said something today." Clara's head snapped up. "She talked?" 3 words. "Is this home?" while I was putting her to bed. "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know, that we'd see." He paused. "But I wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell her we could stay here, build something permanent. First time since Sarah died that I've wanted to stop running." Clara felt something crack open in her chest, something painful and hopeful at the same time. "You could stay. After this is over, however it ends, you and Lila both. If we survive." "When we survive." Elias almost smiled at that. "Optimism doesn't suit you, Mrs. Whitlock. Neither does giving up, Mr. Boon." The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Clara and Elias rode to town, leaving Sam and Lila at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and stay armed. The documents were secured in Clara's saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth against the elements. Town looked the same as always, weathered buildings, rutted streets, people going about their business with heads down against the wind. But Clara felt the difference. People who used to nod in greeting looked away now. Shopkeepers who used to chat didn't meet her eyes. Word had spread. She was trouble now, someone to avoid if you valued your safety. The land office clerk was a nervous young man named Peterson who stammered when he saw the documents Clara wanted copied. "Mrs. Whitlock, I'm not sure I should..." "Should what?" "Make copies of legal documents that I have every right to copy." "It's just Mr. Hale was very clear about..." "Mr. Hale doesn't run the land office. You do, and I'm asking you to do your job." Peterson's hand shook as he took the documents. "This could get me fired." "Not filing would get you worse. These are legal requests. You refuse, I can file a complaint with the territorial office." It was a bluff. Clara had no idea if she could actually file such a complaint, but Peterson didn't call her on it. He made the copies with shaking hands, certified them with his official stamp, and handed them back like they might explode. "Please don't tell anyone I helped you," he whispered. Clara felt pity for him, this frightened young man caught between doing right and staying safe. "I won't. Thank you." They secured the copies in 3 different locations, one set with the boarding house ladies, one with Doc Brennan, one buried in a waterproof box on Clara's property. Redundancy, Elias called it, making sure the truth survived even if they didn't. The thought should have been morbid. Instead, it felt practical. They were preparing for war, and in war, people died. The goal was making sure their deaths meant something. On the ride back, they passed Ben Morrison's ranch, or what was left of it. The barn was gone, burned to nothing but charred timbers and ash. The house was intact, but the windows were broken, and there were bullet holes in the walls. Ben stood in the ruins, Kate beside him, both of them staring at the destruction with numb expressions. Clara and Elias dismounted, approaching carefully. "When?" Clara asked. "Last night, 20 men, maybe more. Came like an army, guns blazing. We got out through the back, hid in the root cellar. By the time it was safe to come out, the barn was gone, and half our livestock was scattered to hell." "Anyone hurt?"
No, they weren't trying to kill us, just destroy everything we'd built. Ben's voice was hollow. Sending a message.
Kate's hands were fisted at her sides, shaking with fury or shock or both. He's escalating, taking out the organizers, showing everyone else what happens if they stand with us. Elias surveyed the damage with a professional eye. This was coordinated, military-style raid. He's not playing anymore. Neither are we, Ben said. There was steel under the exhaustion in his voice. I'm not backing down. If anything, this makes me more determined.
Good, Clara said. Because we're building something that can actually hurt him. Not just resistance, evidence. Real, documented, legal evidence that can bring him down. She told them about Doc's records, about the copies they'd made, about the case they were building. With every word, she saw something shift in Ben and Kate's expressions, grief hardening into determination. What do you need? Kate asked. Witnesses. Signed testimony. Anyone willing to go on record about what Hale's done. We can do that, and I know others who will too, after they see this. Kate gestured at the ruins. He made a mistake. Thought destroying our property would break our spirit, but all he did was prove we're right to fight. They spent an hour documenting the damage, Elias sketching the scene, Clara making notes, Ben providing testimony about the attack. Everything dated, everything witnessed, everything building toward a case that might actually matter. As they prepared to leave, Ben caught Clara's arm. Thank you, he said quietly, for not giving up, for showing the rest of us we don't have to accept this. Clara didn't feel worthy of thanks. She felt scared and overwhelmed and uncertain of everything, but she nodded anyway, accepting the weight of leadership she'd never asked for. The ride home was silent. Both she and Elias were processing what they'd seen, what it meant, how close they all were to the same fate. They were a mile from the ranch when they smelled smoke. Elias kicked his horse into a gallop, Clara right behind him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, thoughts spiraling to the worst possibilities. Sam hurt, Lila taken, the house burning like Ben's barn. But when they crested the ridge overlooking the ranch, everything looked intact. The smoke was coming from a bonfire in the yard, and Sam stood beside it with Lila close by, both of them unharmed. Clara nearly collapsed with relief. What happened? Elias demanded, dismounting in a rush, pulling Lila into his arms. Nothing, Sam said. We're fine, but they left you a message. He gestured to the bonfire. As Clara got closer, she realized what was burning: fence posts, tools, bags of seed. Everything she'd stored in the shed for spring planting. Everything she'd need to start crops when winter broke. Destroyed. Not stolen, destroyed. Hale wasn't even bothering to profit from it anymore. He just wanted to hurt them. Pinned to the shed door was a note, written in crude block letters. Last chance. Sell or burn. Burn. Clara stared at it, feeling ice settle in her stomach. This wasn't random intimidation anymore. This was a deadline, an ultimatum. She had a choice. Give Hale what he wanted or watch everything burn. Clara pulled the note down, crumpling it in her fist. We're not selling. Clara, Sam started. We're not selling, she repeated, louder. He can burn every fence post, poison every well, destroy every crop. I'm not giving him this land. Elias put a hand on her shoulder. We need to be smart about this. I am being smart. Smart enough to know that if I give in now, he wins. Not just against me, against everyone. Every rancher who's standing with us, every person who's risked something to fight back. If I fold, they all fold, and Hale gets exactly what he wants. She looked at the bonfire, at her destroyed supplies, at the message spelled out in ash and malice. Then she looked at Elias, at Sam, at little Lila watching with those two old eyes. We finish the case, she said. We get the evidence, build the testimony, and we take it to someone who can't be bought or intimidated. And we do it fast before he burns us out completely. That's risky, Sam said. Everything's risky now. Might as well risk it all on something that matters. Elias nodded slowly. Then we work fast. Priority 1, find someone in Hale's organization willing to give us financial records. Priority 2, get every witness statement signed and secured. Priority 3, identify which territorial officials might actually listen. They spent the evening planning in frantic detail, knowing time was running out, knowing Hale's patience was exhausted. The alliance they'd built was being tested, pushed to breaking, but it hadn't broken yet. And Clara was discovering she had more fight in her than she'd ever imagined,
More stubbornness, more fury, more willingness to risk everything on the slim chance of justice. Thomas would have been proud. Or horrified. Probably both. But Thomas wasn't here. Clara was. And she was done being the grieving widow everyone expected to fail. It was time to become something else entirely. The break came from an unexpected source 3 days later. Clara was in the chicken coop collecting eggs with hands so cold they barely functioned when she heard horses approaching. Her body tensed automatically now. Every sound a potential threat, every visitor a possible attack. She grabbed the small pistol she'd started carrying and moved to the doorway. But it wasn't Hale's men. It was a woman Clara vaguely recognized from town, riding a tired mare and looking over her shoulder like she expected pursuit. Mrs. Whitlock? The woman dismounted clumsily, nearly falling. She was maybe 30, thin to the point of gaunt, with nervous hands that wouldn't stay still. I need to talk to you. Private. Clara studied her, trying to place the face. Do I know you? Margaret Stiles. I worked as a bookkeeper for Mr. Hale. Kept his ledgers, managed accounts, filed paperwork. Her voice dropped. I know what he's doing. All of it. And I can prove it. Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She looked around, saw no sign of other riders, then gestured toward the house. Come inside. Elias appeared from the barn, rifle ready, but Clara waved him over. Get Sam, and bring the documents from the root cellar. I think we just caught a break. Margaret Stiles sat at the kitchen table with shaking hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Up close, Claire could see the bruise on her cheek, poorly covered with powder, and the raw patches on her wrists that looked like rope burns. How long have you worked for Hale? Elias asked. He'd positioned himself between Margaret and the door, not threatening, but cautious. 4 years since my husband died and I needed income. Mr. Hale pays well, better than anything else available for women. I thought I was lucky. Her laugh was bitter. Didn't realize what I was getting into. What changed? Clara asked. Why come to us now? Margaret's fingers tightened on the cup. He killed someone, right in front of me. A worker who'd found discrepancies in the mine payroll threatened to go to the authorities. Hale called him to the office, said they'd settle it. Then She stopped, swallowing hard. He beat that man to death with his own hands, made me watch, made me understand what happens to people who cross him. The room went very quiet. When? Elias asked. 3 days ago. I've been trying to figure out how to get away ever since. He's had men watching me, making sure I don't run. But I slipped out this morning when they changed shifts. Sam had retrieved the documents and spread them on the table. Margaret's eyes widened when she saw them. Where did you get these? Doc Brennan. He's been collecting evidence for years. Margaret nodded slowly. These are good. These show the pattern. But they're missing the financial proof, the bribes, the payoffs, the accounting tricks he uses to hide illegal income. She looked up at Clara. I have those records. Copies I've been making for months, hiding them because some part of me knew I'd need them eventually. Where are they? Elias asked sharply. Safe house in town, back room of the boarding house. The ladies there, they've been helping me. Clara felt something unlock in her chest. The boarding house ladies had been at the meeting, had offered to help however they could. She should have known they'd already been working on their own. How much documentation do you have? Elias pressed. Everything. Ledgers showing payoffs to the marshal, the local judge, 2 territorial officials, records of fraudulent land purchases, intimidation payments, hush money to witnesses, 4 years of systematic corruption, all documented in Hale's own handwriting. It was almost too good to be true. Clara felt suspicion warring with hope. Why should we trust you? This could be a setup. Margaret met her eyes steadily. You shouldn't trust me. You should verify everything I give you. But I'm telling you the truth because I can't live with what I've seen anymore. Because that worker he killed had 3 children, and they think their father died in an accident. Because if I stay silent, I'm complicit in murder. Elias studied her with that careful assessment Clara had learned meant he was reading micro-expressions, looking for tells. Finally, he nodded. I believe her. Could still be a trap, Sam said. Hale could have sent her to feed us false information, discredit the real evidence. Then we verify before we use anything, Clara said. But if she's legitimate, this is exactly what we need. Financial records tying Hale to specific crimes, proof of corruption we can take to federal authorities. Margaret pulled a folded paper from her coat. I made a list. Every official he's bribed, every illegal transaction, every witness he's paid off or threatened. Cross-reference it with what you've got. You'll see the pattern. Clara took the list, scanning names and amounts. Some she recognized, the marshal, as expected. Others surprised her. A territorial judge she'd thought was honest. 2 land office officials. Even a federal clerk who processed mining claims. The scope of it was staggering. This is going to take time to verify, Elias said, reading over her shoulder. And we need to move the documents somewhere safer. If Hale realizes Margaret's missing, he'll tear town apart looking for her. The Morrisons, Clara said. Their place is fortified now, and they've got people watching round the clock. We move everything there, combine it with what we've already got. Margaret shook her head. Too obvious. He'll check the Morrisons first. They're known allies. You need somewhere unexpected. Where? Sam asked. A small voice spoke from the doorway. Here. Everyone turned. Lila stood there, so quiet they hadn't heard her approach. She looked at her father, then at Clara, then back to the table covered in documents. They won't look here, she said, voice rusty from disuse but clear. Bad man thinks you're weak, thinks you'll run. Won't expect you to keep important things where he already looked. It was the most words Clara had heard the girl speak. Elias looked like he might cry. She's right, he said quietly. Hale already hit this place. From his perspective, we're barely hanging on. He wouldn't expect us to use it as a base of operations. Clara considered it. The ranch was vulnerable in some ways, isolated, easy to attack. But Lila had a point. Hale's arrogance would work against him. He'd assume they'd hide evidence somewhere safer, somewhere obvious. We fortify more, she said. Dig a real hiding place, something that wouldn't be found even in a thorough search. Keep the copies distributed, but bring the originals here. They spent the rest of the day doing exactly that. Elias and Sam dug a hiding spot beneath the barn floor, 3 feet down, lined with oilcloth and fitted with a false bottom that looked like packed earth. Margaret's documents went in along with Doc's records, everything sealed against moisture and discovery. Clara watched Lila helping her father, passing him tools, speaking in short sentences that got longer as the day wore on. Whatever wall had been holding her silence in had finally cracked. That night, after Margaret had been moved to a room in the main house, and the documents were secure, Clara found Elias on the porch keeping watch. She talked, Clara said, sitting beside him. Yeah. Elias's voice was rough with emotion. First real sentences since her mother died. I was starting to think I'd never hear her voice again. What changed? You did. This place did. She finally feels safe enough to come back. He looked at Clara. Thank you for that. I didn't do anything special. You gave us a place to land, a reason to stop running. That's everything. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds. Somewhere out there, Hale was probably learning that Margaret had disappeared. The timer was ticking now. They had days, maybe hours, before he came for them with everything he had. We need to move fast, Clara said. Get this evidence to someone who matters before Hale realizes what we've got. Territorial governors corrupt according to Margaret's list. Federal marshal's office is 3 days' ride to the capital. Then we ride for 3 days. Elias shook his head. Too dangerous. Hale's got men on every road out of here. We'd never make it. So what do? Sit here and wait for him to burn us out? We make him come to us. Force his hand, get him to incriminate himself where we have witnesses. Elias turned to face her. We set a trap. Clara felt cold slide down her spine. What kind of trap? The kind where we make him think he's won. Make him think we're broken, ready to sell. Get him here to finalize the deal and document everything. His threats, his admissions, everything we need to prove conspiracy and intimidation. That's insane. He'll bring armed men. We could all die. We could all die anyway. At least this way we control the when and where. Clara wanted to argue, to find a safer option. But Elias was right. They were out of time and out of safe choices. Every day they waited was another day for Hale to find Margaret, to destroy evidence, to eliminate witnesses. How would it work? Elias outlined a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. Clara couldn't decide which. They'd send word to Hale through back channels. Margaret willing to return the documents in exchange for safe passage out of the territory. Meeting at Clara's ranch, neutral ground, with witnesses present. Hale would jump at the chance to recover his records and eliminate the threat in one move. But what he wouldn't know was that they'd have the real evidence hidden and secured, with duplicate copies already on their way to federal authorities. And they'd have witnesses positioned to document everything Hale said and did. He'll suspect a trap, Clara said. Of course he will. But his arrogance won't let him resist. He thinks we're desperate, thinks we're scrambling. He'll come because he can't imagine we're actually dangerous. It was a gamble. Everything depended on Hale's pride, on their ability to control a situation that could spiral into violence at any moment, on witnesses being brave enough to testify after seeing what happened. But it was a chance. Maybe their only one. We'd need the alliance behind us, Clara said. Enough people watching that Hale can't just massacre everyone. And we need Margaret's testimony on record before the meeting. If something goes wrong, the evidence survives. They spent the next day making preparations. Sam rode to the Morrisons and the other alliance members, explaining the plan and asking for bodies, people willing to be present, to witness, to testify if things went sideways. Doc Brennan took Margaret's sworn statement, documenting everything she knew in excruciating detail. Clara wrote letters to the federal marshal's office, to the territorial governor's office in the capital, to every authority she could think of. Each letter included a summary of the evidence and a plea for investigation. Elias made copies, sealing them with wax and addressing them carefully. Even if we fail, he said, these letters ensure the truth gets out. That's a comfort, Clara said dryly. It's the best we've got. Word was sent to Hale through a paid messenger. Margaret Stiles had evidence she was willing to return. Meeting at the Whitlock Ranch, noon 2 days hence. Come prepared to negotiate. Then they waited. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara checked and rechecked their preparations, made sure weapons were loaded and positioned strategically, went over the plan until she could recite it in her sleep. Lila stayed close to her father, occasionally asking questions in that rusty voice that was getting stronger each time she used it. Will the bad man come? She asked that evening. Yes, sweetheart, he will. Will you keep us safe? Elias crouched down to her level. I'm going to try. But if things get dangerous, I need you to do exactly what Mrs. Whitlock tells you. Can you do that? Lila nodded solemnly. I can be brave. I know you can. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the ways the plan could fail, all the people who could get hurt, all the consequences of her stubbornness. Maybe she should have just sold when Hale first asked. Maybe Thomas would still be alive, and she'd be somewhere safe instead of preparing for what amounted to a siege. But then she thought about Margaret's bruises, about the worker beaten to death, about all the people Hale had destroyed over the years. Someone had to stand against him. It might as well be her. Morning came too fast. By 9, Alliance members started arriving. Ben and Kate Morrison with 4 ranch hands, the Calloway brothers with 3 more, Doc Brennan and the boarding house ladies, even Jacob Henderson, who'd been skeptical at the first meeting. 26 people total, armed and grim-faced. They positioned themselves strategically, some in the barn with clear sightlines to the yard, others in the house at windows, a few outside, pretending to work but actually forming a perimeter. The goal was to look unprepared while actually being ready for anything. At 11:30, scouts signaled incoming riders. Clara's stomach clenched. Hale arrived at noon exactly with 12 men, all armed, all hard-eyed professionals who'd done this kind of work before. He rode in front on his expensive bay, looking every inch the powerful man who'd never been seriously challenged. Clara stepped onto the porch, Elias beside her. Her hands were sweating despite the cold. Mr. Hale, she said, thank you for coming. Hale dismounted smoothly, handing his reins to one of his men. Mrs. Whitlock, I understand we have business to discuss. We do. Margaret Stiles has something that belongs to you. She's willing to return it in exchange for safe passage out of the territory. Is she now? Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. And where's Miss Stiles? Inside, waiting to hear your terms. My terms are simple. She returns what she took, provides written assurance that no copies exist, and leaves the territory immediately. In exchange, I won't press charges for theft. Generous of you. I can be generous when people are reasonable. His gaze swept the ranch, the burned hay pile, the damaged barn, all the evidence of his previous attacks.
I can also be very unreasonable when they're not. Clara felt Elias tense beside her. This was the dangerous part, getting Hale to reveal himself without pushing so hard he turned violent immediately. Before we get Margaret, Clara said carefully, I want to understand something. All this damage to my property, the intimidation, the threats, that stops if I cooperate? That depends on you, Clara. I made you a fair offer months ago. You refused. Everything that happened after was unfortunate but avoidable. Avoidable how? By selling my land to you. By being smart. By recognizing when you're outmatched. Hale stepped closer, and Clara saw the cold calculation in his eyes. You're a widow trying to run a ranch you can't manage. I'm offering you a way out with dignity and profit. The alternative is watching everything burn until you've got nothing left to sell. That sounds like a threat. It's reality. This territory has rules, and one of them is that power determines outcomes. I have power, you don't. Simple mathematics. Clara heard several people shifting in their hiding spots, documenting this. Good. Let Hale hang himself with his own arrogance. And if I still refuse to sell? Hale's expression hardened. Then things get worse. For you, for anyone helping you, for this pathetic alliance you've tried to form. I've crushed bigger obstacles than a bunch of failing ranchers and delusional widows. Is that what you told Thomas before he died? The words were out before Clara could stop them. Hale's eyes narrowed dangerously. Your husband died in an accident. Did he? Or did he die because he refused to sell, just like I'm refusing now? Careful, Mrs. Whitlock. Accusations like that require proof. What if I have proof? What if I have evidence of everything you've done? The fraud, the intimidation, the murders. Hale laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then you'd be dead already. The fact that you're standing here making empty threats tells me you have nothing. Margaret appeared in the doorway then, right on cue. Hale's attention snapped to her. Miss Stiles, how kind of you to return to us. Margaret's voice was steady, despite her obvious fear. I want amnesty, full immunity, and safe passage. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. You stole from me, betrayed my trust. Give me one reason I shouldn't have you arrested right now. Because I know where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically and literally. Margaret descended the porch steps, each movement deliberate. I know about the mine workers you let die, the surveys you falsified, the officials you bribed. 4 years of dirty secrets, Mr. Hale, and I documented all of it. Hale's facade cracked slightly. Clara saw fury flash across his face before he controlled it. If you had such documentation, you'd have gone to the authorities already. Who would I go to? The marshal you pay? The judge who owes you his position? Everyone in this territory is either on your payroll or too scared to stand against you. Then you're as helpless as everyone else. Maybe. Or maybe I found people brave enough to stand with me. People tired of your threats and your violence and your corruption. That's when Ben Morrison stepped out of the barn, followed by the Calloway brothers and 4 others. Doc Brennan emerged from the house. More people appeared from various positions, all armed, all watching. Hale's men reached for their weapons. Elias's rifle came up instantly, aimed at the nearest gunman. Easy, Clara said. Nobody needs to die today. Hale looked around, actually surprised for the first time. He'd expected desperation and submission. Instead, he was facing an organized resistance. What is this? He demanded. This is you being held accountable, Clara said. Everyone here has witnessed your threats. We've documented your admission that you've been behind the attacks on my property. And we have evidence, real, documented evidence of your crimes going back years. You're bluffing. Am I? Want to test that theory? Because I've got copies of your financial records showing bribes to officials, testimony from victims you've intimidated, proof of fraudulent land deals, and systematic corruption. Clara stepped down from the porch, meeting his eyes. You're finished, Hale. The only question is whether you go quietly or make this ugly. For a moment, nobody moved. 26 witnesses against 12 hired guns. The math was clear, but so was the potential for bloodshed. Then one of Hale's men made a choice that changed everything. He drew his pistol. What happened next unfolded with terrible speed. Elias shot the man in the shoulder before he could aim. Return fire erupted from Hale's group. Clara dove for cover as bullets tore through the porch railing. Lila screamed from inside the house. The yard exploded into chaos. Elias moved like someone who'd done this before. Quick, efficient, deadly. He dropped 2 more of Hale's men with precise shots while shepherding Clara toward better cover. Sam was firing from the barn, providing suppression fire. The Alliance members who'd never been in a real gunfight were slower to react, but they had superior positions and numbers. Hale's men had training and experience, but they'd expected an easy intimidation, not a prepared defense. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes. To Clara, it felt like hours. She crouched behind an overturned water trough, shotgun in shaking hands, watching men kill each other over her land, her choice to stand instead of surrender. When the shooting stopped, 4 of Hale's men were down, 1 dead, 3 wounded. 2 Alliance members were hit, neither fatally, and Hale himself stood in the middle of the yard with Elias's rifle pointed at his chest. "It's over," Elias said. His voice was calm, professional. "Your men are finished. You're surrounded by witnesses. Put your hands up." Hale looked around at the carnage, at the Alliance members emerging from cover with weapons trained on him and his surviving men. Clara saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing options, looking for escape. Then his gaze landed on the house, on the window where Lila was watching. Clara saw his intention a split second before he moved. Hale lunged for the house, pulling a concealed pistol, clearly planning to grab Lila as a hostage. Elias didn't hesitate. The shot took Hale in the leg, dropping him before he reached the porch. The powerful man who'd terrorized the territory for decades fell hard, screaming in pain and rage. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I own this territory. I own all of you." "Not anymore," Clara said. She stood over him, shotgun ready, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "You're under citizen's arrest for assault, attempted murder, and about 24 other crimes we've got documented. Doc, patch him up enough that he lives to stand trial." Doc Brennan approached with his medical bag, no sympathy in his expression. "This is for my son," he said quietly as he started working on Hale's leg. "For everyone you've hurt." The surviving members of Hale's crew were disarmed and restrained. 2 had run when the fighting started. Claire didn't blame them. They weren't paid enough to die for their employer's pride. As the immediate crisis settled, Clara looked around at the damage. Bullet holes in her house, blood in the yard, wounded people being tended, the high cost of standing your ground. But they'd won. Against every logical expectation, they'd actually won. Ben Morrison approached, bleeding from a graze on his arm but grinning. "We did it. We actually did it." "Not yet," Elias said. "This is just round 1. Now we have to make the charges stick." He was right. They had Hale in custody, had witnesses to his threats and his violent response, but they still needed to get this to authorities who'd actually prosecute rather than releasing him on a technicality. "The federal marshal," Clara said. "We take him there ourselves, along with all the evidence and every witness willing to testify." "That's a 3-day journey through territory where Hale has friends and resources," Sam pointed out. "He'll have allies trying to free him. Then we travel in force, all of us. Make it a convoy he can't easily attack." Margaret spoke up from where she'd taken cover during the fighting. "There's a telegraph office in the mining town 30 miles east. We could send word ahead, have federal authorities meet us part way." It was a good plan. Maybe the only plan that didn't involve more bloodshed. They spent the next hour organizing. The wounded were stabilized. Hale was secured thoroughly, hands bound, leg bandaged, guarded by 6 armed people who had very personal reasons to make sure he didn't escape. Statements were taken from everyone present, documenting exactly what had happened. As evening approached, Clara found herself alone in the kitchen, trying to process everything. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, they'd actually survived. But the cost was real. People were hurt, property was damaged, and the fight wasn't over yet, just entering a new phase. Elias found her there, Lila's hand in his. "You okay?" he asked. "No, but I'm alive, which is better than I expected this morning." Lila let go of her father's hand and approached Clara shyly. "Thank you," she said in that rusty voice, "for being brave." Clara felt her throat tighten. "You're the brave one. You warned us, helped us. You're part of this victory." The girl actually smiled, small and tentative, but real. "Is this home now? Can we stay?" Clara looked at Elias, saw the question in his eyes. He was giving her the choice, even now. "Yeah," Clara said, "this is home. For all of us."
That night, they held a meeting of the Alliance around a bonfire in the yard. 26 people who'd stood together, who'd risked everything, who'd proven that courage and solidarity could overcome power and corruption. Ben Morrison raised a cup of whiskey someone had produced. To Clara Whitlock, who taught us how to fight back. To Justice, Kate added. Finally, they drank and talked and planned the journey ahead. It would be dangerous. Hale would have allies on the road, people trying to free him or eliminate the witnesses, but they had something Hale had never understood, the strength that came from people who chose to stand together instead of being divided by fear. As the fire burned down and people began finding places to sleep, Clara walked the perimeter of her property one last time. The ranch looked different now, scarred by violence, but somehow stronger for it, like metal tempered in fire, made harder by what should have broken it. Thomas would have hated the violence, would have argued for legal channels and proper procedures, but Clara thought he'd understand why she'd fought, why she'd risked everything rather than surrender what they'd built together. She was still standing there when Elias joined her, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much adrenaline, too much everything." "Yeah, I know the feeling." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. "What you did today," Clara said. "Shooting Hale. That was to protect Lila. That was to protect everyone. He was going for a hostage situation, and those never end well. Still, you chose us over whatever consequences might come from shooting a powerful man." Elias looked at her. "You're surprised?" "No, just grateful." "Don't be grateful yet. We still have to get him to the federal marshal, still have to make the charges stick. Lot can go wrong between here and justice." "But we've got a chance, real chance, not just desperate hope." "Yeah, we do." Elias paused. "You know what Lila asked me earlier? She asked if you were going to be her new mother." Clara's heart skipped. "What did you tell her?" "That it wasn't that simple. That you and I needed to figure things out. But that I hoped so." "Elias, I know it's complicated. I know we're in the middle of a fight and this isn't the time. But when this is over, if we survive, I want to build something permanent here. With you. If you'll have us." Clara thought about all the reasons to say no, to protect herself, to avoid risking her heart after losing Thomas. Then she thought about Lila's smile, about Elias standing beside her through everything, about the future they might actually have now that Hale was in custody. "Ask me again when we get back from delivering Hale to the authorities," she said. "If we both survive, we'll figure it out." Fair enough. They went inside as the first snow of winter began to fall, soft flakes that covered the blood in the yard and the bullet holes and all the evidence of violence. By morning, the ranch would look peaceful again, like nothing had happened. But Clara would remember. They all would. This was the night they'd stopped running, stopped accepting, stopped letting power dictate their futures. This was the night they'd drawn a line and defended it with everything they had. And somehow, impossibly, they'd won. The convoy left at dawn, 20 people on horseback, 4 wagons carrying supplies and wounded, and 1 very secure prisoner. Hale rode in the lead wagon, bound and guarded, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He kept trying to engage his guards in conversation, offering bribes, making threats, looking for any weakness to exploit. Nobody was interested. The journey to meet the federal marshals would take 3 days if they pushed hard. Clara had insisted on coming despite Sam's arguments that she should stay and protect the ranch. Her response was simple. She'd started this fight. She'd see it through. Lila rode with Elias, bundled against the cold, occasionally asking questions about where they were going and why. Her father answered patiently, turning the journey into a lesson about justice and courage and standing up for what was right. On the second day, they were ambushed. 20 riders came out of a canyon pass, clearly hired by Hale's allies to free him. But the convoy was ready. Scouts had spotted them coming, and the Alliance had prepared defensive positions. The fight was brief and brutal. 3 of the attackers were killed, 5 more wounded or captured. The convoy lost 2 people, Jacob Henderson, who'd been skeptical at first but fought bravely at the end, and one of the Calloway brothers. They buried them by the roadside with markers promising to return with proper headstones. Clara spoke words over the graves that felt inadequate. Thanks for their sacrifice, promises that their deaths mattered, assurances that the fight would continue. It felt like lying. These men were dead because she'd chosen to fight instead of surrender. Their families would grieve because of her stubbornness. But when she said as much to Doc Brennan, he shook his head. They chose to come, chose to stand. You didn't make them. You gave them the opportunity. There's a difference. Clara wanted to believe that. She held on to it like a lifeline as they continued the journey. On the third day, they met the federal marshals at a designated rendezvous point. 4 serious men with official credentials and the authority to take custody of prisoners accused of territorial crimes. The lead marshal, a man named Carter with gray hair and hard eyes, listened to their story with growing interest. He examined the documents, took statements from witnesses, and inspected Hale with professional detachment. "This is substantial," he said finally. "If even half of this holds up in court, Victor Hale is going to prison for the rest of his life." "What about the officials he bribed?" Clara asked. "The local marshal, the judge." "We'll investigate all of it. Corruption of this scale, we don't ignore it." Carter looked around at the assembled Alliance members. "You people did something remarkable here. Most communities, they just accept when a powerful man runs roughshod over them. You fought back. Won." "A lot of people died for that victory," Ben Morrison said quietly. "Yeah, they usually do. But they died free, fighting for something that mattered. That counts for something." The marshals took custody of Hale and the captured attackers, promising to keep the Alliance informed about the trial proceedings. They also took copies of all the evidence, securing it officially so it couldn't be destroyed or dismissed. As they rode away with their prisoners, Hale looked back one last time. His eyes found Clara's, and she saw pure hatred there. And something else. Disbelief. He still couldn't quite accept that a widow and a collection of struggling ranchers had actually beaten him. Clara met his gaze steadily until the wagons disappeared over a ridge. Then she turned to the people who'd stood with her. "Let's go home," she said. The ride back was quieter, weighted with exhaustion and grief, and the strange hollowness that came after surviving something that should have killed you. They stopped to bury Jacob Henderson and the Calloway brother properly, marking the graves and promising their families that they'd died heroes. When Clara's ranch finally came into view, she felt something break open in her chest. They'd left it 3 days ago, not knowing if they'd return, not knowing if the whole enterprise would collapse into violence and failure. But they'd made it, bruised, bleeding, traumatized, but alive. And Victor Hale was in federal custody, facing charges that would destroy his empire and reveal his crimes. They'd actually done it. The Alliance members dispersed to their own properties, promising to meet again soon to coordinate rebuilding and support. Doc Brennan stayed long enough to check everyone's wounds and pronounce them likely to survive. Margaret Stiles accepted an offer to stay at the Morrison Ranch until she figured out her next move. And Clara, Elias, Sam, and Lila were left standing in the yard of a ranch that had survived against impossible odds. "Hell of a week," Sam said finally. "Hell of a year," Clara corrected. Lila tugged on her father's hand. "Can we stay now, forever?" Elias looked at Clara. The question was there in his eyes, the one he'd asked before they left. Clara thought about Thomas, about the dream they'd shared and the future they'd planned. Then she thought about the different future taking shape now, harder earned, bloodier won, but somehow more real for all that. "Yeah," she said to Lila, "you can stay forever." The girl beamed, a full, genuine smile that transformed her serious face into something bright and hopeful. She ran to Clara and hugged her tight, and Clara found herself hugging back. This child who'd survived so much loss and was choosing to trust again anyway. That night, after Lila was asleep and Sam had taken the first watch, Clara and Elias sat on the porch in the cold dark. "You asked me a question before we left," Clara said, "about building something permanent." "I remember. We survived. We actually survived." "Yeah, we did." Clara turned to face him. "So ask me again." Elias took her hand, his grip warm and solid and real. "Clara Whitlock, would you let me and Lila stay here? Build a life with you? Figure out what comes next together instead of alone?" Clara felt tears on her cheeks but didn't bother wiping them away. "Yeah, I would. I will." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like he was afraid she might break. But Clara had spent the past months proving she wouldn't break, that she could bend and survive and come back stronger. When they pulled apart, She was smiling. We're going to have to rebuild. The barn needs work. We lost most of our winter feed, and half the fences are still damaged. I know. And there'll be a trial. We'll have to testify, face Hale again, relive all of this. I know that too. And it's going to be hard, really hard, building a life from wreckage. Elias smiled. Clara, we just took down the most powerful man in the territory. I think we can handle some fence repairs and court testimony. She laughed, actually laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness, when you put it that way. They sat together watching the stars, two people who'd found each other in the middle of grief and violence and had chosen to build something new from the ashes of everything they'd lost. The frontier was still harsh. Winter was still coming. There would be more struggles, more setbacks, more moments when survival seemed impossible. But for the first time since Thomas died, Clara felt something other than despair. She felt hope. And on a Montana ranch at the edge of winter, with blood in the yard and smoke in the air and scars that would never fully heal, hope was enough to start building a future on. The summons came 6 weeks later, delivered by a federal courier who looked like he'd ridden hard through winter storms to reach them. Clara took the official envelope with hands that had finally stopped shaking every time a stranger approached the ranch. Trials set for March 15th, she read aloud. Capital City. All witnesses required to attend. Elias looked up from the fence post he was repairing. Winter had been brutal, but they'd survived it. Barely. The Alliance had pooled resources, shared supplies, helped each other through the lean months. What Hale had tried to destroy through division, they'd rebuilt through cooperation. That's 6 weeks out, he said. Gives us time to prepare. Or time for Hale's people to try something. Clara folded the summons carefully. Margaret said he still has allies, money hidden away, people loyal enough or scared enough to act on his behalf. Let them try. We're ready this time. Sam emerged from the barn, looking at the official seal on the envelope. So it's really happening. We're going to see him in court. Yeah, we are. Clara felt the weight of it settle into her bones. They'd won the battle, survived the ambush, delivered Hale to federal custody. But a trial meant facing him again, meant having their testimony picked apart by expensive lawyers, meant risking everything on the hope that justice would actually prevail. Lila came running from the house, her voice clear and strong now, no trace of the silent child she'd been 4 months ago. Papa, Clara, come see what I made. They followed her inside where she'd been working on a drawing, the ranch house, surrounded by people. Clara recognized the figures, herself, Elias, Sam, the Morrison family, Doc Brennan, all the people who'd stood together. It's beautiful, Clara said, and meant it. It's us, Lila said proudly. Our family. The word hit Clara harder than she expected. Family. Not just her anymore, not the ghost of Thomas and the empty rooms and the crushing loneliness, but something new, chosen rather than inherited, built from shared struggle instead of blood. Elias put his hand on Clara's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the winter months. They'd been careful, taking things slow, but the trajectory was clear. Once the trial was over, once Hale was definitively dealt with, they'd make it official. For now, they existed in a space between past grief and future hope, learning to navigate it together. We should send word to the others, Sam said. Let them know about the trial date. Make sure everyone's prepared to testify. Clara nodded. I'll ride to the Morrisons tomorrow. You take the Hendersons and the Callaways. I'm coming with you, Elias said, no room for argument in his tone. We don't travel alone anymore. That's the rule. It was a rule born from necessity. 3 times over the winter, people connected to Hale had tried to intimidate witnesses, burned a barn here, ran off livestock there, sent threatening messages. Nothing as overt as before, but enough to remind them that the fight wasn't over. But the Alliance had held. Every attack was met with collective response, every threat documented and reported to the federal marshals. They'd learned to operate as a unit, and it made them harder to break. The next morning, Clara and Elias rode north under skies heavy with the promise of more snow. The Morrison Ranch had been rebuilt, stronger than before, with help from a dozen neighboring families. It stood as proof that community could accomplish what individuals couldn't. Kate Morrison met them at the door, face drawn with exhaustion. Thank heavens you're here. We've got a situation. Inside, they found Ben Morrison sitting at the table with a man Clara didn't recognize. Thin, nervous, probably in his 40s with the look of someone who'd spent too long afraid. "This is Robert Crane," Ben said. "He worked as Hale's attorney's clerk. He's got information." Crane looked at Clara with desperate eyes. "I need protection. Witness protection. Immunity. Something. If Hale's people find out I'm here, I'm dead." "What kind of information?" Elias asked, immediately suspicious. "The kind that could destroy what's left of Hale's organization. He's been running his defense from prison, bribing potential jurors, threatening witnesses, coordinating with his remaining allies to sabotage the trial." Crane pulled papers from his coat. "I copied everything, names, amounts, plans. It's all here." Clara took the papers, scanning quickly. Her stomach dropped. "He's targeted 12 jurors, offered some money, threatened others. And there's a list here, people he's planning to have eliminated before they can testify." Her own name was third on the list. "This is attempted jury tampering and conspiracy to commit murder," Elias said, voice hard. "This alone could add decades to his sentence." "If we can prove it," Kate said, "and if we survive long enough to present it." Crane's hands were shaking. "He doesn't know I copied these. I've been careful. But his attorney will notice documents are missing eventually. When he does, he'll know it was me. I'm the only one with access." "How'd you get access to something this sensitive?" Clara asked. "I'm trusted. Was trusted. Been working for the firm for 15 years, never gave them reason to doubt my loyalty." Crane's voice broke. "But I can't be part of this anymore. I watched them plan to murder people. Actual murder, discussed like it was a business transaction. I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. How do I look at her knowing I helped monsters stay free?" Clara understood that reasoning. Understood the moment when complicity became unbearable, when staying silent felt worse than the risk of speaking up. "We need to get this to the federal marshals immediately," she said. "This changes everything." "And we need to move up our security," Elias added. "If Hale's planning to eliminate witnesses, he'll accelerate the timeline once he realizes these documents are missing." Ben stood. "I'll send riders to warn everyone on that list. Get them to safe locations until the trial." "The trial's still 6 weeks out," Kate protested. "We can't hide for 6 weeks." "We can if the alternative is dying." Elias was already calculating logistics. "We need a central location, somewhere defensible where we can gather all the key witnesses and protect them as a group." "Here," Ben said immediately. "This ranch is fortified. We've got supplies for a siege if it comes to that. And we're positioned well. Good sight lines, only 2 approaches, water source on the property." It made sense, though Clara hated the idea of gathering everyone in one place. One successful attack could eliminate all the witnesses at once. But scattered and isolated, they were more vulnerable. "We should put it to a vote," she said. "Everyone on that list deserves to know what they're facing and choose whether to hide or take their chances." Over the next 3 days, the Alliance gathered at the Morrison Ranch. 14 people whose testimony was critical to the case, plus families and protectors. 28 people total, converting the ranch into something between a refuge and a fortress. Not everyone was happy about it. Margaret Stiles had been trying to build a new life in the next territory over, and coming back meant risking everything she'd fled. Doc Brennan was elderly, and the travel was hard on him. The remaining Calloway brother had lost too much already and wanted nothing more than to forget the whole thing. But they came, because they'd seen what Hale did to people who crossed him, and they understood that individual safety was an illusion. Their only protection was collective action. Clara stood in the Morrisons' main room as they assembled, feeling the weight of leadership she'd never asked for but couldn't escape. These people had followed her into danger once. Now she was asking them to do it again. "I know you're scared," she began. "I'm scared too. We're facing a man who's killed before and is planning to kill again. A man with resources and connections and nothing left to lose." "So why are we doing this?" someone called out. "Why not just disappear? Let someone else testify." "Because there is no someone else. We're it. We're the ones who saw what happened, who documented the crimes, who have proof that can't be explained away. Without us, Hale walks free. And if he walks free, everything we fought for meant nothing." "Easy for you to say," the Calloway brother shot back. "You didn't lose a brother to this fight." "No. I lost a husband. Maybe murdered, maybe just unlucky, but gone either way." Clara met his eyes. "I understand the cost. We all do.
But we can honor those losses by finishing what they died for, or we can let their deaths be meaningless. That's the choice. The room was silent. Then Doc Brennan stood, joints creaking with age. My son died 8 years ago because he was going to expose Hale. I've lived with that guilt every day since, the knowledge that my silence allowed a killer to stay free. I'm 73 years old. I don't have many years left, but I'll be damned if I die without seeing justice done. He looked around at the assembled group. I'm testifying, whatever it costs. One by one, others stood. Margaret Stiles, hands still shaking but voice firm. The boarding house ladies who'd sheltered her. Ranch hands who'd witnessed attacks. Every person who'd been wronged, every family who'd lost something. Not everyone stood. 3 people chose to leave, to take their chances elsewhere. Clara didn't blame them. Courage wasn't universal, and fear was a perfectly rational response to death threats. But 25 people stayed. 25 witnesses who had decided that justice mattered more than safety. The siege mentality set in quickly. They established watch rotations, supply inventories, communication protocols. Elias took charge of security, drawing on his martial training to create defensive positions and fallback plans. Sam organized the supplies and rationing systems. Kate Morrison coordinated information sharing, making sure everyone knew the plan if things went wrong. Clara found herself in the unfamiliar role of morale keeper, moving between groups, listening to fears, offering reassurance she didn't entirely feel herself. It was exhausting, pretending to be confident when terror lived just beneath her skin. Lila helped more than anyone expected. The 8-year-old seemed to understand that people needed distraction, needed moments of normalcy. She organized the other children into games, told stories, drew pictures that she distributed to the adults like precious gifts. Her resilience reminded them what they were fighting for, a future where children could grow up without fear. 2 weeks into the siege, the first real attack came. It was past midnight when the sentries spotted them, 8 riders approaching from the east, moving carefully, but not carefully enough. Elias roused everyone quietly, positioning them according to the defense plan they'd drilled a dozen times. Clara crouched at a second-floor window, rifle ready, heart hammering. Beside her, Margaret clutched a pistol with white-knuckled hands. "They're going to try to draw us out," Elias had warned earlier. "Create a distraction. Make us expose ourselves. Don't take the bait." The riders circled the ranch at a distance, clearly assessing defenses. Then one of them lit a torch and threw it toward the barn. It fell short, fizzling in the snow. A feint, testing their response. When nobody reacted, the riders grew bolder. They moved closer, 2 of them dismounting to approach on foot. Clara could see their faces in the moonlight, hard men doing hard work for money, no ideology or passion, just professional violence. One raised a rifle toward the house. Elias fired first, a warning shot that kicked up snow near the man's feet. The riders scattered, returning fire. For 30 seconds, the night exploded with gunfire and shouting. Then it stopped as abruptly as it started. The riders retreated, leaving 2 wounded behind. They tested the defenses and found them stronger than expected. Message delivered and received. The witnesses were prepared to fight. In the morning, they sent one of the wounded men back with a message of their own. Every attack would be documented, every aggressor identified, every incident reported to federal authorities. Hale was already facing decades in prison. Keep attacking witnesses, and it became life without possibility of parole. Clara didn't know if it would work. But it was all they had, the hope that even Hale's allies would recognize when the cost exceeded the potential gain. The weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. More attacks came, probing assaults, attempts at infiltration, even an effort to poison their water supply that was caught early. Each one was documented, evidence gathered, statements taken. They were building a secondary case against Hale's organization even as they prepared for the primary trial. Robert Crane proved invaluable. He knew the legal system inside and out, helped them understand what to expect in court, how to present testimony effectively. He also revealed more about Hale's operations. The scope of corruption went far beyond what they'd initially uncovered. He wasn't just bribing local officials, Crane explained one evening. He had connections to territorial government, to federal land offices, even to officials in Washington. This empire took decades to build, and it's going to take years to fully dismantle. But the trial will start that process, Clara said. If we win, if the jury believes us over his lawyers,
If he doesn't find a way to escape or get the case dismissed on technicality. Crane rubbed his face tiredly. I've seen him wriggle out of tight spots before. Man's like a snake, hard to pin down, dangerous when cornered. Then we'd better be thorough, Elias said. They spent the remaining weeks preparing. Every witness rehearsed their testimony, anticipated defense questions, learned to stay calm under pressure. Doc Brennan compiled medical evidence. Margaret organized financial documents. Clara coordinated the narrative, making sure their story was coherent and compelling. It felt inadequate against the weight of what they faced, but preparation was all they could control. Finally, the week of the trial arrived. The federal marshals sent an armed escort, 12 men to transport the witnesses safely to the Capitol. They traveled in a convoy, weapons ready, expecting ambush. It never came. Either Hale's people were waiting for a better opportunity, or the show of force was enough to dissuade them. The territorial capital was bigger than any town Clara had seen. Real buildings made of brick and stone, paved streets, hundreds of people going about their business. It felt overwhelming after months of isolation at the Morrison Ranch. They were housed in a hotel requisitioned by the federal government, guarded around the clock. Clara shared a room with Lila, who pressed her nose against the window and stared at the city with wide eyes. Have you been here before? The girl asked. Once. When Thomas and I first came to the territory, we stopped here for supplies before heading to the ranch. Was he nice? Thomas? Clara felt the familiar ache, but it was gentler now, worn smooth by time and new connections. Yeah, he was nice, optimistic, sometimes foolishly so, but he believed in building something good, and he worked hard to make it happen. Like you and Papa. Yeah, like us. Lila considered this. I don't remember my mama very well anymore. Sometimes I feel bad about that. Clara pulled the girl close. That's natural. Memories fade. But what she gave you, her love, her strength, that stays. You carry it with you even when you can't remember her face clearly. Do you still remember Thomas's face? Every detail. But the pain of losing him, that's fading, making room for new things. That's okay too. They sat together watching the city lights, a widow and an orphan, learning to build a family from grief and hope. The trial began on a cold March morning. The courtroom was packed, spectators, reporters, officials curious to see a powerful man finally held accountable. Clara sat in the witness section, Elias beside her, surrounded by the Alliance members who'd traveled so far to testify, and there, at the defense table, sat Victor Hale. He looked thinner than Clara remembered, prison having stripped away some of his polished veneer. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, full of contempt for everyone who dared challenge him. When his gaze found Clara, she saw murder there, pure, undiluted hatred. She stared back until he looked away first. The prosecution opened with a methodical presentation of evidence. Financial records showing systematic fraud. Survey documents proving falsified land claims. Testimony from officials who'd been bribed. It was damning, layer upon layer of corruption exposed to daylight. Hale's attorney, an expensive lawyer from back east, tried to poke holes, suggest alternative explanations, paint his client as a successful businessman victimized by jealous competitors. But the evidence was overwhelming. Then came the witness testimony. Doc Brennan went first, calm and professional, presenting medical evidence of suspicious deaths and injuries that pointed to foul play. The defense tried to rattle him, but decades of frontier medicine had given him unshakable composure. Margaret Stiles was next. She was terrified, voice shaking as she detailed 4 years of watching Hale commit crimes and hide evidence. But her documentation was flawless, every transaction recorded, every bribe cataloged. The defense attorney tried to discredit her as a disgruntled employee, but her records spoke for themselves. Robert Crane's testimony was devastating. He brought insider knowledge of Hale's legal maneuvering, proof of jury tampering, evidence of planned witness elimination. The courtroom erupted when he presented documents showing Hale had ordered murders from prison. The judge called for order, looking shaken. This was beyond typical territorial corruption. This was organized criminal enterprise. On the third day, Clara was called to testify. She walked to the stand with her heart pounding, aware of everyone watching, Hale's cold stare, Elias's supportive presence, reporters scribbling furiously. She swore her oath and sat down, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The prosecutor was gentle, walking her through her story. Thomas's death. Hale's initial offer, the escalating intimidation, the burned hay pile, the poisoned well, the attacks that had pushed her to organize resistance.
And why didn't you simply sell, Mrs. Whitlock? The prosecutor asked. Why risk everything when accepting his offer would have been safer?
Clara looked directly at Hale. Because men like him only win when good people give up. Because my husband died, maybe murdered, we'll never know for sure. And I couldn't let that be for nothing. Because if we don't stand against corruption and violence, we're saying it's acceptable. And it's not. The defense attorney cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint her as a vindictive widow with an axe to grind, suggesting her accusations were born of grief rather than fact. But Clara held firm, referring back to documented evidence, witness corroboration, the systematic pattern that went far beyond personal vendetta. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitlock, that you organized an armed confrontation at your ranch? I organized a peaceful meeting that Mr. Hale and his men turned violent. We defended ourselves. You shot at law-abiding citizens. I shot at criminals attempting murder in front of 24 witnesses. There's a difference. The courtroom stirred. The judge banged his gavel. By the time Clara left the stand, she was exhausted but unbroken. She'd told her truth, and it was now in the jury's hands. Other witnesses followed. Ben and Kate Morrison describing the attacks on their property, Alliance members detailing intimidation tactics, even the reform members of Hale's organization who decided cooperation was better than prison. The evidence piled up like a mountain. Hale's attorney fought hard, but there was no credible defense against the sheer weight of documentation and testimony. After 2 weeks, both sides rested. The judge gave instructions to the jury, and they retired to deliberate. The waiting was torture. Clara paced the hotel room, unable to settle. What if the jury didn't believe them? What if Hale's money had reached them despite all precautions? What if, after everything, he walked free? Elias found her at the window, staring at nothing. Whatever happens, he said quietly, we fought. We stood up. That matters.
Does it? If he goes free, what was the point?
The point was that we tried. The point was that we built something together. An alliance, a community, proof that people can stand against power when they work together. That doesn't disappear even if the verdict goes wrong. Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd invested everything in this trial, this hope for justice. If it failed, she didn't know how to process that. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the afternoon of the third day, word came that they'd reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed again, tension thick enough to choke on. Clara sat between Elias and Sam, Lila on her other side holding her hand with surprising strength for such a small person. Hale sat at the defense table, face carefully blank, but Clara saw the tension in his shoulders. The jury foreman stood. On the charge of fraud in land acquisition, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of bribery of public officials, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, the litany continued. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 12 charges, 12 guilty verdicts. The courtroom erupted. Hale's face went white, then red with fury. He started to stand, shouting something Clara couldn't hear over the noise. His attorney grabbed his arm, trying to calm him. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! I will have order! When quiet finally returned, the judge looked at Hale with barely concealed contempt. Mr. Hale, you have been convicted of serious crimes against the people of this territory. Your actions have caused immeasurable harm, destroyed lives, corrupted institutions, murdered innocent people in pursuit of wealth and power. This court sentences you to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Additionally, all your assets are to be seized and liquidated to provide restitution to your victims. Hale exploded then, lunging across the table toward the judge. Marshals subdued him quickly, dragging him from the courtroom as he screamed threats and accusations. Clara watched him go and felt nothing but exhaustion. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd fought too hard for too long. We won, Lila whispered. We actually won. Yeah, Clara said. We did. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed them. Clara gave a brief statement about justice prevailing and the importance of communities standing together. Then she escaped with Elias and the others to the hotel. That night, the Alliance gathered in the hotel dining room for an impromptu celebration. Someone produced whiskey, toasts were made, stories were shared. It felt surreal after months of fear and preparation. Doc Brennan raised his glass. To those we lost along the way, may they rest knowing their sacrifice meant something. To justice, Kate Morrison added. Finally delivered. Clara raised her glass but didn't drink immediately. She was thinking about Thomas, about Jacob Henderson, about the Calloway brother, about all the people who'd paid the price for Hale's greed. To building something better, she said finally, to making sure this never happens again. They drank to that. Later, when the celebration had wound down and people were drifting off to bed, Clara found herself alone with Elias on the hotel balcony. What happens now? She asked. Now we go home, rebuild, live the lives Hale tried to take from us. Just like that? Just like that. Elias took her hand. I know it feels anticlimactic. We fought so hard for this moment and now it's here and it's just quiet. But that's what victory looks like sometimes. Not glory, just the chance to keep living. Clara leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. I want to make it official. When we get back, you, me, Lila, a real family. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Elias kissed the top of her head. Then we'll make it official. Build something that lasts. They stood together watching the city lights. Two people who'd survived the worst and were choosing to hope for the best. The trial was over. Hale was imprisoned. Justice, imperfect and incomplete but real nonetheless, had been served. And somewhere in Montana, a ranch waited for them, scarred but standing, ready to become something new. The journey home took 4 days, and every mile felt like shedding weight Clara hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The capital city faded behind them, with its brick buildings and paved streets and courtrooms where justice had finally caught up to Victor Hale. Ahead lay the territory they'd fought for, the land that had tested them and nearly broken them, but ultimately belonged to them in ways that went deeper than any deed or title. Spring was arriving early, the snow melting in patches to reveal brown earth that would soon turn green. Clara rode beside Elias, with Lila perched in front of her father, chattering about everything she saw. The girl had become almost unrecognizable from the silent, traumatized child who'd arrived at the ranch 6 months ago. Now she pointed at birds, asked questions about plants, made plans for a garden she wanted to plant when they got home. Home. The word had changed meaning over the past months. It wasn't just the ranch anymore, the buildings and the land and the livestock. It was the people who'd stood together, the connections forged in fire, the community built from shared struggle. Think the place is still standing? Sam asked, riding up alongside them. He'd aged during the trial, new lines carved deep around his eyes. But there was lightness in him now that hadn't been there before. Ben sent word they'd been watching it, Clara said, keeping the animals fed, making sure Hale's remaining people didn't burn it down out of spite. Hale's remaining people. Sam shook his head. Hard to believe it's really over, that he's actually locked up. 40 years, Elias said. He'll die in prison. Man his age with his health, he won't make it half that time. Clara thought about that. Hale growing old behind bars, his empire dismantled, his power stripped away. She'd expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even joy. Instead, she felt mostly tired. Justice served didn't undo the damage done. It didn't bring back the dead or erase the trauma or magically fix everything that had been broken. But it did mean they could move forward without looking over their shoulders. And that was something. They crested the final ridge late on the 4th day and saw the ranch spread out below. Clara's breath caught. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful. The barn roof that Elias had fixed, the corrals where cattle grazed, the house with smoke rising from the chimney where someone had started a fire in anticipation of their return. There it is, Lila said softly. Our home. They rode down together, and as they got closer, Clara saw people emerging from the barn and the house. Ben and Kate Morrison, Doc Brennan, Margaret Stiles, who'd apparently decided to stay in the territory after all. Others from the Alliance gathered to welcome them back. The greeting was warm but subdued. Everyone was exhausted, worn down by months of fear and preparation and the intensity of the trial. They needed time to recover, to process, to figure out who they were now that the fight was over. That night, after the visitors had left and Lila was asleep in her room, the small bedroom Clara had prepared months ago, but Lila had been too scared to use until now, Clara and Elias sat on the porch in the gathering dark. Feels strange, Clara said. being home without anything to fight against. Yeah, we've been running on adrenaline and purpose for so long, the quiet's almost louder than the chaos was. Clara understood that. For months, every decision had been about survival, every action directed toward defeating Hale. Now that goal was achieved, and she felt unmoored, uncertain what came next. "We should get married," she said abruptly. "Soon, before I lose my nerve." Elias turned to look at her, surprise and amusement mixing on his face. "That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard." "I'm not a romantic person. You know that by now." "I do know that. And yeah, we should get married. Make this official. Give Lila the stability she needs. Give ourselves the future we've been too busy to think about. Doc Brennan can perform the ceremony. Keep it simple. Just family and the Alliance members who want to come."
"Simple works for me." Elias took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "Clara Whitlock, will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life fixing fences and arguing with you about the proper way to plant crops?" Clara laughed, the sound surprising her. "Yeah, I will." They set the date for 2 weeks out, giving people time to prepare, but not so much time that Clara could overthink it. The ceremony would be at the ranch, outdoors if weather permitted, with a meal afterward and whatever celebration people had energy for. Those 2 weeks were busy in ways that felt almost normal. Clara worked on repairs the ranch desperately needed, planted early crops with help from Lila, who took to gardening with unexpected enthusiasm. Elias rebuilt the section of fence that had been damaged in the final attack, this time making it stronger, built to last. Sam had been offered a position at the Morrison Ranch. They needed an experienced hand and were willing to pay well, but he'd turned it down. "Figure I'll stay here," he'd said when Clara asked. "If that's all right with you. Place feels like home now. Wouldn't know what to do with myself anywhere else." "You're always welcome here, Sam. You know that. Even after you and Elias make it official? Don't want to be the third wheel on a newly married couple." Clara snorted. "We're too old and too tired for romance to get in the way of practical ranch management. Besides, we'll need help. Planning to expand, take on some of the orphaned kids from town who need work and a place to land." Sam's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious." "Hale's assets are being liquidated for restitution. Alliance members are getting compensation for damages. We'll have money for the first time since Thomas died. Seems right to use it for something good." It was Elias's idea, actually. He'd been thinking about all the kids like Lila, children who'd lost parents to disease or violence, or the simple harshness of frontier life. Kids who needed homes and work and the chance to build futures. The ranch could become that place, a sanctuary for people who'd fallen through the cracks. "It'll be hard work," Sam warned. "Everything worth doing is hard work. We've learned that much." The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright. One of those perfect spring days that made you believe in possibilities. Clara woke early, nervous in a way she hadn't been even facing Hale in court. Getting married meant hoping again, trusting again, believing that the future could hold something other than loss. Kate Morrison arrived mid-morning with a dress she'd altered to fit Clara. Nothing fancy, just a simple blue cotton that made Clara feel almost pretty when she caught her reflection. Lila wore a new dress too, pale yellow, and she spun in circles, making the skirt flare out. "You look like a princess," Margaret Stiles said, braiding Lila's hair. "I'm not a princess. I'm going to be a rancher. But I can look nice while doing it." The ceremony was brief, held under the cottonwood tree near the house. Doc Brennan spoke about commitment and partnership and building lives together. Clara and Elias exchanged simple vows, promises to stand together, to be honest with each other, to work toward a shared future. When Doc pronounced them married, Elias kissed Clara gently, and the assembled crowd cheered. It was a small gathering, maybe 30 people total, but it felt right. These were the people who'd stood with them, who'd risked everything alongside them, who'd earned the right to celebrate this new beginning. The meal afterward was potluck, everyone contributing what they could. There was music, someone had brought a fiddle, and dancing, and stories that grew taller with each retelling. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in years, feeling the tightness in her chest finally loosening. As the sun set and people began drifting toward home, Lila approached Clara shyly. "Can I call you Mama?" she asked. "Or is that wrong because you're not my real mama?" Clara knelt down to the girl's level, feeling emotion thick in her throat. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, Mama, Clara, anything. There's no wrong answer." "I think Mama," Lila decided. Because you take care of me like a mama would, and Papa loves you, so that makes us a real family, right? Yeah, sweetheart, that makes us a real family. Leela hugged her tight, and Clara held on, this child who'd survived so much loss and was choosing to trust again anyway. If a traumatized 8-year-old could be that brave, Clara figured she could manage it too. That night, after everyone had left and Lila was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Clara and Elias lay in bed in the room they'd share from now on. You think we can actually do this? Clara asked. Build something lasting? Make this work? I think we already are. We survived hail. Everything else is easier by comparison. That's a low bar. Maybe. But it's our bar. Elias turned to face her. I'm not going to promise you perfect, Clara. I'm going to promise you real. Real work, real struggle, real partnership. Is that enough? Clara thought about Thomas and his beautiful optimism, his promises of perfect futures that never quite materialized. Then she thought about Elias and his clear-eyed honesty, his refusal to pretend things were easier than they were. Yeah, she said, real is enough. Real is everything. The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Clara and Elias worked the ranch as partners, dividing tasks based on skill rather than gender. Whoever was better at something did it, and pride didn't enter into it. Sam handled the livestock, his years of experience invaluable. Lila helped where she could and attended lessons with other children twice a week, slowly catching up on the education she'd missed. The first orphan arrived in late April, a boy of 12 whose parents had died of cholera over the winter. He was sullen and angry and didn't trust that the offer of work and shelter was genuine. Clara understood that wariness, that certainty that anything good would be ripped away eventually. You can stay as long as you work hard and follow the rules, she told him. We're not running a charity. This is a working ranch, but you'll get fair pay, decent food, and a place to sleep that's yours. No one's going to hurt you here. The boy, his name was Daniel, tested those boundaries hard for the first 2 weeks. Broke rules, talked back, generally made himself difficult. Clara held firm, neither coddling nor punishing harshly, just maintaining consistent expectations. Elias was better with him, drawing on his own experience of loss and displacement. He taught Daniel how to handle horses, how to repair tack, how to take pride in work well done. Slowly, the boy's edges softened. By summer, they had 4 kids living on the ranch. Daniel, 2 sisters whose father had abandoned them, and a quiet girl of 7 who barely spoke. It was chaos and noise and constant work, but it felt right in ways Clara couldn't quite articulate. One evening in June, sitting on the porch after a long day, Clara watched the kids playing in the yard. Lila teaching the younger girl a game, Daniel showing the sisters how to throw a rope. The sun was setting in shades of gold and red, and the air smelled like growing things. We did something, didn't we? She said to Elias. Changed something that mattered. We started something. Jury's still out on whether it lasts. Always the optimist. Someone has to keep you grounded. But he was smiling. Though yeah, we did change things. Hale's empire is dismantled. Corrupt officials are being investigated. The Alliance is still active, providing mutual aid and protection. And we've got a ranch full of kids who are getting a second chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. Clara thought about that. Thought about how close they'd come to losing everything. How easily Hale could have won if any number of things had gone differently. The margin between success and failure had been razor thin. But they'd made it. Not through luck or divine intervention, but through stubborn refusal to give up, through community standing together, through choosing to fight even when the odds were terrible. You know what Thomas used to say? Clara asked. He said the frontier doesn't care about your story. It just cares whether you're tough enough to survive it. Sounds like Thomas. But I think he was wrong. The frontier doesn't care, that's true. But our stories matter anyway. Not to the land or the weather or the random cruelty of accident and disease. They matter to each other. To the people we stand with, the communities we build, the futures we create together. Elias was quiet for a moment. That's the most hopeful thing I've ever heard you say. Don't get used to it. I'm still a skeptic at heart. I know. That's why I love you. The words hung in the air between them. They'd never said it directly before, had danced around it with actions and commitment, but not the actual declaration. I love you too, Clara said. Wasn't looking for it, didn't think I wanted it after Thomas. But here we are. Here we are, Elias agreed. The Alliance held its first annual meeting in August, gathering at the Morrison Ranch to assess progress and plan for the future. 23 families showed up, representing the core of the community that had stood against hail. Ben Morrison opened the meeting with a summary of the restitution process. Federal government's liquidating Hale's assets systematically. Should take another year to sort through everything, but preliminary estimates suggest most families will receive compensation covering their losses and then some. What happens to all that land? Someone asked. Hale owned half the territory, being broken up and sold at fair prices. Homesteaders and small ranchers get first option to buy. Idea is to prevent another power consolidation like Hale managed. And the corrupt officials? Doc Brennan stood. 3 arrested so far, including our former marshal. Territorial governor's under investigation, but maintaining his position for now. It's slow work, rooting out that kind of corruption. But it's happening. Kate Morrison addressed the group next. We need to talk about making this alliance permanent, not just a crisis response, but an ongoing mutual aid society. Collective purchasing power for supplies, shared equipment, coordinated defense if needed, support for families facing hardship. The discussion that followed was practical and forward-looking. They established bylaws, elected officers, created committees for different functions. What had started as desperate resistance was becoming structured community support. Clara watched it all with quiet satisfaction. This was the real victory. Not defeating Hale, though that mattered, but building something that would outlast him. Creating a framework where small ranchers and homesteaders could thrive instead of being picked off individually. You should be proud, Margaret Stiles said, sitting down beside Clara. This is your legacy. It's our legacy. Everyone here contributed, but you started it. You were the one brave enough to say no when everyone else was too scared or beaten down. That matters. Margaret had stayed in the territory, taking a bookkeeping position with the Alliance and helping other victims of Hale's crimes navigate the restitution process. She'd built a new life from the ashes of her old one, proof that starting over was possible at any age. What are you going to do when the restitution comes through? Clara asked. Buy a small place of my own. Nothing fancy, just enough land to be self-sufficient. Maybe take in a kid or two who need homes like you're doing. Margaret smiled. Turns out I like being part of something bigger than myself. Didn't know that about myself before. The meeting broke up as evening approached, people heading home with plans and promises and renewed commitment to supporting each other. Clara and Elias rode back to their ranch with Lila dozing in the saddle, exhausted from playing with the other children all day. She's happy, Elias observed. Really happy. I wasn't sure that was possible after everything she went through. Kids are resilient, more resilient than we give them credit for. So are adults, apparently. Look at us. 6 months ago, we were fighting for our lives. Now we're married with a ranch full of kids and plans for expansion. Clara laughed quietly. When you put it that way, it sounds insane. It is insane, but it's also good. They put Lila to bed and checked on the other kids before finally settling on the porch with coffee, watching the stars emerge. This had become their nightly ritual. 30 minutes of quiet conversation before sleep, processing the day and planning tomorrow. Daniel asked me about his future today, Elias said. Where he'd go when he's old enough to leave, what kind of work he could do. What did you tell him? That he could stay as long as he wanted. That we'd help him learn a trade, save money, set up his own place eventually if that's what he chose. That this didn't have to be temporary unless he wanted it to be. You think he believed you? Not yet, but he will. Same way Lila eventually believed she was safe here. Clara thought about that. The long process of building trust, of proving through consistent action that promises were real. It applied to more than just the kids. The whole community was learning to trust again, to believe that cooperation was possible, that power didn't have to mean oppression. Fall arrived with its usual swiftness, the leaves turning and the air taking on that particular crispness that meant winter wasn't far behind. But this year, Clara faced the approaching cold season without dread. They had supplies, livestock, feed, and money coming from the restitution that would carry them through lean times. More importantly, they had help. The Alliance had established a system where families would rotate helping each other with harvest and winter preparation. What used to be isolated struggles were now collective efforts. Clara was helping the Morrisons bring in their last hay cutting when a rider approached, a federal marshal she didn't recognize. Mrs. Boon? He'd gotten her new name from someone.
I have news from the capital. Clara's stomach clenched, wondering what fresh crisis was arriving. Victor Hale died in prison 3 days ago. Heart attack, according to the medical examiner. Thought you'd want to know. Clara stood there holding a pitchfork, processing the information. Hale was dead. The man who'd terrorized the territory for decades, who'd murdered her husband and countless others, who'd built an empire on suffering, gone. Thank you for letting me know, she managed. After the marshal left, Kate Morrison approached. You all right? I don't know what I am. I thought I'd feel something, relief or satisfaction or closure. But I just feel empty. That's normal. We built our whole lives around opposing him for so long. Having him suddenly gone leaves a hole. Clara understood that. She'd defined herself as Hale's opponent, as the widow who wouldn't surrender, as the leader of resistance. Now what was she? That night she talked through it with Elias while Lila and the other kids slept. I keep thinking I wasted so much time and energy fighting him when I could have been building other things. You did build other things. The Alliance, this ranch, our family. You did both. Fought him and created something new. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But if he'd just died earlier or been arrested sooner, or if I just sold and moved somewhere else, then you wouldn't be who you are now, wouldn't have learned what you're capable of, wouldn't have this life we're building. Elias took her hand. I'm not saying the suffering was good or necessary, but it happened and we survived it, and we're making something meaningful from it. That's what matters. Clara wanted to argue, to spiral into what-ifs and regrets, but Elias was right. The past couldn't be changed. The only direction was forward. Winter came, and with it the usual challenges. Cold that seeped into bones, snow that made travel difficult, the constant work of keeping animals and people fed and warm. But there was laughter too, and warmth, and the comfort of not facing it alone. The kids thrived in their own ways. Daniel became an excellent horseman and started teaching the younger ones. The sisters, Emily and Sarah, took to cooking and helped Clara manage the household. Little Anna, the quiet 7-year-old, attached herself to Lila and followed her everywhere. Clara watched Lila with Anna and saw herself in that protective stance, that determination to keep something smaller and more vulnerable safe. The cycle of care continuing, each generation learning from the last. By the time spring returned, they'd added 3 more kids to the ranch, siblings whose mother had died in childbirth and whose father couldn't manage alone. The ranch was bursting at the seams, and Clara and Elias started planning an addition to house everyone comfortably. The restitution money came through in April, a substantial sum that represented years of Hale's stolen profits being returned to those he'd harmed. Clara used her portion to expand the ranch, buy better equipment, and establish a fund for the kids' futures. You could have kept it all for yourself, Margaret pointed out when she visited. Used it to build something grand, leave the territory, start fresh somewhere easier. This is starting fresh, just doing it here, with people who matter. The second annual Alliance meeting was larger, 37 families now, word having spread about the mutual aid society that actually worked. They'd helped each other through winter, pooled resources for spring planting, created a rotating fund for emergencies. Ben Morrison, re-elected as chairman, addressed the group with visible pride. 2 years ago, we were isolated families getting picked off one by a man who thought power meant everything. Today, we're a community. We've proven that standing together works, that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice. The applause was genuine, not polite. These people had lived the transformation, knew its cost and its value. Clara didn't speak at the meeting, didn't need to. She'd said what needed saying through actions over the past 2 years. Now she was content to let others take leadership roles, to step back and focus on her ranch and her family. Walking home that evening, Lila skipping ahead while the other kids chattered about the meeting, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. Too much grief lived in her bones for pure happiness. But a deep sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. You're quiet, Elias observed. Just thinking. About Thomas. About how none of this would exist if he hadn't died. How his loss somehow led to all this. You think he'd approve? Clara considered. Honestly, I think he'd be horrified by the violence and the fighting, but I think he'd love what we've built. The community, the kids getting second chances, the way we're helping each other.
That was always his dream, people working together to build something good. Then we're honoring him, in our own way? Yeah, I think we are. Summer brought prosperity, good weather, strong crops, healthy livestock, and the continuing restitution payments that allowed people to invest in improvements. The Alliance organized a harvest festival, the first real celebration the territory had seen in years. Clara helped organize it, watching with satisfaction as families who'd been strangers 2 years ago now worked together like old friends. Children played without the shadow of fear. People made plans for futures that extended beyond mere survival. During the festival, Doc Brennan pulled Clara aside. He'd aged noticeably over the past year, moving slower, tiring easier. "Wanted to thank you," he said, "before it's too late." "Too late for what?" "I'm dying, Clara. Cancer. Got maybe 6 months if I'm lucky." The news hit hard. Doc had been instrumental in everything, providing medical care, gathering evidence, testifying against Hale. He was a pillar of the community. "I'm sorry," and Clara managed. "Don't be. I'm 75 years old. I've lived a full life. And thanks to you and this alliance, I got to see my son's death avenged. Got to see Hale brought to justice. That's more than most people get. Real closure, real peace. What can we do for you?" "Keep doing what you're doing. Keep building this community. Make sure it lasts beyond all of us." Doc smiled. "And maybe name one of those kids of yours after my boy. Keep his name alive in a good way." Clara promised she would. Doc Brennan died peacefully in his sleep that October, surrounded by people who loved him. The funeral was the largest the territory had ever seen, a testament to how many lives he'd touched, how many people he'd helped. Standing at his grave, Clara thought about legacy, about what people left behind when they died. Thomas had left her a dream of community. Doc had left evidence and testimony that brought down a corrupt empire. Hale had left nothing but a cautionary tale about power corrupting. What would she leave? What would any of them leave? The answer, she realized, was standing all around her. The kids they'd taken in, now growing into capable young adults. The alliance that continued to thrive. The proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they worked together. That winter was the easiest Clara had known since coming to the territory. Not because the weather was milder. If anything, it was harsher. But because they'd built systems to handle it, created networks of support that meant no family faced hardship alone. When the Henderson family lost their barn to fire, 20 people showed up to rebuild it within a week. When the Calloway's youngest fell ill, Doc's replacement, a young physician from back east who'd been drawn by stories of the alliance, provided care without worrying about payment. The ranch continued to grow. By spring, they had 9 kids living with them permanently, ranging from age 6 to 16. Daniel, now 14, had become Elias's right hand in managing the livestock. Emily was teaching the younger children to read. Lila, almost 10, had blossomed into a confident, happy child who remembered her mother but was no longer paralyzed by that loss. Clara stood on the porch one evening in early May, 3 years to the day since Elias and Lila had first arrived. The ranch looked nothing like it had then, expanded, improved, alive with the noise and chaos of children and purpose. Elias joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Thinking deep thoughts? Thinking about how far we've come, how different everything is. Better different? Yeah, better different, harder in some ways, more responsibility, more people depending on us, but fuller too, more meaning. No regrets? Clara thought about Thomas, about the life they'd planned that never materialized, about the violence and fear and the price paid by too many people, about the easier path she could have chosen, selling to Hale and starting over somewhere else. No regrets, she said finally. Grief, yes. Sorrow for what was lost, but no regrets about the choices I made. Even marrying a drifter with a traumatized kid and a dark past? Clara laughed. Especially that. Best impulsive decision I ever made. It wasn't impulsive. You thought about it for at least 10 minutes. 10 whole minutes. Practically an eternity for me. They stood together watching the sun set over land they'd fought for and nearly died for, and ultimately transformed into something worth having. In the yard, children played while Sam called them in for dinner. Smoke rose from the chimney of a house that had been too empty for too long. This was Clara's legacy. Not defeating Hale, though that mattered. Not surviving, though that was essential. But this,
The community built from resistance, the children given second chances, the proof that people could stand against power and win, could build something beautiful from the wreckage of trauma and loss. The frontier hadn't broken her. She'd bent it instead, reshaped it into something that reflected her values rather than simply enduring its cruelty. And that, she thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years would pass. The alliance would continue to grow and evolve. The children would become adults, some staying to work the ranch, others leaving to build their own lives with the tools and confidence they'd gained. Clara and Elias would age, their hair graying, their bodies wearing out from decades of hard work. But the foundation they'd built, community over isolation, justice over power, cooperation over competition, that would endure. It would spread beyond their territory, inspiring other communities to organize, to resist corruption, to build systems of mutual support. The ranch would become known throughout the region as a place where lost kids could find family, where the broken could heal, where the lessons of standing against injustice were passed down through generations. And when Clara finally died, old and worn but satisfied, surrounded by family that included both blood and choice, her legacy wouldn't be measured in land or money or individual achievement. It would be measured in lives changed, communities strengthened, and the enduring proof that ordinary people choosing to stand together could reshape their world. The frontier didn't care about stories, Thomas had said, but he was wrong. Stories were everything. They were how people made meaning from suffering, how they passed lessons to the next generation, how they transformed individual struggle into collective wisdom. This was Clara's story, a widow who refused to disappear, a community that chose solidarity over fear, a fight against corruption that proved justice was possible, even in the hardest places. And it was a story that would continue long after its original protagonists were gone, living on in the children they'd raised, the alliance they'd built, the better world they'd fought to create. Not because the frontier had become gentle or forgiving, it hadn't. It was still harsh, still unforgiving, still capable of crushing the unprepared. But now there were people who knew how to stand against that harshness together, who understood that vulnerability shared became strength, that community well organized could overcome individual power, that the work of building something good was never finished but always worthwhile. And that, Clara thought in her final years, was the real victory. Not defeating one tyrant, but proving that tyranny itself could be resisted. Not surviving one winter, but creating systems that would help others survive winters to come.
The ranch that had nearly broken her became the foundation for something larger than herself. The grief that had nearly consumed her became the fuel for transformation. The choice to fight instead of flee became the catalyst for change that rippled far beyond her individual life. She'd started as a widow on the edge of winter, alone and angry and barely holding on. She ended as the matriarch of a family and a community, surrounded by people who'd learned from her example that courage was choosing to act despite fear, that justice was worth fighting for even at great cost, and that the strongest walls were built not of wood or stone, but of people standing together. The frontier had tested her. She'd passed. And in passing, she'd changed it forever.